Hey everyone, my name is Rich, and this is Rich Talks Records, episode number 52, I think. And today, yes, we are picking the epic back up. Public Image Ltd. in 1980. Yes, the world's first, only, and last post-punk limited company. Their activities in 1980. Yes, they did not release a studio album that year. They recorded one. But there is just so much, and it is so dense that I thought that this merited its own video. 1981 will come next. And because the next album, 1981's Flowers of Romance, was released that year, I think we'll actually discuss the album proper then. But there is much to talk about from 1980. Before I begin, the good and the bad, two pieces of Public Image Ltd. News in the last couple days. On Record Store Day this year, they are going to be actually releasing, so something I talked a lot about in the Pill in 1978 video. They are releasing the US version of the first album, so it's actually going to come out. How exciting is that? Really, really, really cool. And I will be, in this video, dropping an idea for another potential Record Store Day release, if anybody is listening, because I think it's a good idea and relatively inexpensive. And so that was the good news. The sad news is that found out yesterday that the great producer Dave Jordan, who was engineer on a lot of amazing albums. He had a long engineering career, but like he was the engineer on Remain in Light, but produced some incredible albums, the Alice in Chains stuff, Anthrax, Fishbone's The Reality of My Surroundings, a big album in my early life, and of course the biggest album of my early life, Ritual de lo Habitual, but also Pill's extremely underrated sort of final album of that initial run before the long layoff. 1992's That What Is Not, and I love his work on that. So I just want to mention Dave Jordan, like always a favorite of mine, and his interviews on YouTube are amazing. Like he was a really like kind of tough, no nonsense guy who I really, really love his attitude, but like open and artistic and, you know, doing it for the right reasons. So anyway, so that's kind of it for the precursor. Let us just get into it, shall we? Where we last left off with Pill was they had released their epic masterpiece, Metal Box. Metal Box basically sold through in England and the initial run, and then was, you know, a critical favorite, which I think Pill found rather bewildering. John already had been considered to be in the film for Quadrophenia, but by this point the suits had really come knocking. So at the very beginning of 1980, Richard Branson, the one and only, made another major play to try to get Lydon to team back up with Steve Jones and Paul Cook. There's all sorts of, you know, there's all sorts of hearsay around what that would have looked like. Did he want John to join the Professionals? Would that have meant the Sex Pistols again? It begs the question of who in the hell would have played bass. It's just such a thoroughly terrible top-down idea, and Lydon refused, and he talks about that in his first book. So that's how the year began. Somewhere around the middle of January, Chris Blackwell, Island Records' Chris Blackwell, wanted to make, this is pretty remarkable, I think we can all sort of picture John Lydon in Quadrophenia, but apparently Chris Blackwell, this is a hell of an idea, wanted to make what Saturday Night Fever was to disco. He wanted to make that a reggae version. It's based around reggae music, set in Kingston, with John Lydon in the John Travolta starring role. Need I say more? Need I say more? I think that about covers that one. Thank God that never happened. On the 6th of that year, Public Image Ltd. were supposed to play the Old Grey Whistle test, but postponed because 2 of the members were quote-unquote ill. What the illness was is open to interpretation. I will let you draw your own conclusions. I don't know for certain, of course, but, you know, judging by some of the other things that happened this year, I think we can kind of take a decent stab at it. In my Pill in 79 video, I mentioned a interview with John Lydon where he has short hair and he's wearing a gray suit, that I wasn't sure of what the derivation of that was. I want to say somebody in the comments actually did tell me, but confirmation that that it was from Australian TV, from a show called Countdown Ends the Decade, and so that it was focusing on punk rock, etc. So that is where that quick little clip comes from, and I can link to that. I don't remember if I linked to it before, but I certainly have no problems linking to it again. The other thing that I just realized I neglected to say is, like my Pill in 85 and 86 video, like 78 and 79, this video exists because of the very hard work of the great folks at fodderstomp.com. This is all based off of their chronology, their hard work, their tireless interview transcriptions, of which, for this, I read another whatever, I don't know what it was, 50,000, 60,000, whatever it was, words for this. So I just had this big document that I would whittle away at in the evenings. So, so yeah, again, all thanks go to them. And these videos about Public Image Ltd. Would not be possible without their hard work. We are going on 9 years now since that website's been updated. So, you know, it is an incredible resource. I'll be linking to it. I'll be linking to the interviews. So check that out if you are interested in Public Image Ltd., because that is the top of the mountain of fan websites. I can't imagine there is one better about anybody. So, again, want to state that. Now, 1980 is really the year, and we've already had 2 indications of that, where the rebellious conceptual art, performance art, we're not a band, we're a corporation thing really, really hits hits reality. And, you know, I feel like a decade before, you saw that happen with the counterculture, especially like Swinging London, but, you know, like 1980 is Public Image Ltd.'s 1968, if you will, where the rubber meets the road and where it gets serious, because they are now swimming in these leagues that are, you know, they aren't the more sort of cloistered off art project. I think 78, 79, they tended to be somewhat more authors of their own destiny, and this is where in that expanse they start butting up against the real world and all of the contradictions and irritations and enforced compromises that come with that. And you really see them, I think, struggling to hold on to their essence, their identity, their creativity, and if we don't want to be too hyperbolic, their souls. So I feel like that is what and there's a lot of churn and a lot of Sturm und Drang and a lot of, a lot of growing pains in this year. So anyway, part of that is because they had to pay back Virgin for the metal box, so to finance everything, and also as an anti-bootlegging measure, because they were being, because the music I don't know that it was purely a mercenary thing from the bootleggers. I think, you know, what they were doing was so exceptional and so vibrant that I don't think it's a big surprise that there was a huge bootleg market around them. You know, that you see that sometimes, whether it's, you know, in the early 70s with the proliferation of Velvet Underground bootlegs, or longer term with people like Bob Dylan or Prince. I think that there, or Zappa for that matter, I think that there is an aspect of fans filling the gap. And I think there is kind of a difference between the more mercenary end of bootlegging and the fans being incredibly passionate and evangelical, if you will, about the bootlegs are a form of proselytizing and trying to get this music out there and heard, and that the people who get it and love it can have that much more of it to really, really bite into. So as an anti-bootlegging measure, but also as a way to generate money, they record, they go to Paris for 2 nights, January 17th and 18th. The drummer is Martin Atkins, and they record what winds up as this: the Paris in the Spring, Paris au Printemps. You know, it would be great if someday if there could be a supercut of my mangling of French. Because I'm so spectacularly bad at it, and it's really embarrassing. But it results in this live album, and we're going to be getting into that because it's the only album that Pill put out that year of new material, if you want to call it that. But they do 2 nights at Le Palace. Come on, now that's just a joke. The Palace! So they're in Paris, they do 2 nights, and there is some stunning footage that I'll be linking to, shot by Don Letts. It's only like a couple minutes. It kind of kills me. It's, again, more Super 8 stuff. But the staging, they look fucking amazing. Like, my God. Like, and that's, like, I cannot imagine what that would have been like to see them. I mean, again, you're talking Miles in the mid-70s. You're talking, like, you know, you're at that sort of, I don't know. Again, it is just hard to believe that there was a time where there were people who looked like that and sounded like that and played like that, and you could pay money and go and see that in a concert hall. But really, it's like, it's like Miles, it's like Hendrix, it's that, like, how did this even exist? How was this even possible? The footage that Don Letts shot that is out there, it's 3 songs. It's Annalisa, Memories, and Death Disco. And you know, the sound isn't great, but it's really worth watching. It's really, really interesting to see. It's interesting to see Keith play. It's interesting to see how they sort of conduct themselves on stage. Wobble is still sitting. Again, as I said, they look incredible. They like that, and that's part of what's so compelling about Pill, is how they are visually, as well as how unbelievable they are musically. So the Don Letts footage, I mean, would it be cool if it was the whole show? Yeah, absolutely. But Public Image Ltd. in Paris. So, you know, Martin Atkins is now the drummer. He's now the member, and both shows, the 17th and 18th, at the Palace are out there. So this is the copy that I have. I got this when I got most of my other Public Image Ltd. albums. I think I had this very early on without even really knowing what it was, because again, I can neither read nor pronounce French, but I saw that it was on Virgin. So I was like, well, this is official, so I'm just going to pick this up. And I forget how much it was, but it was inexpensive. I later learned that this was a reissue, a vinyl reissue, and because the original had the Pill logo. So this is, but it does say play loud on both sides. An assertion that is correct. So this as a live album has been put down for years. It's always sort of thought of as a toss-off. It's always thought of as not being particularly good. It doesn't, I don't really ever see good reviews of it. I don't really ever see it get rated. Anything like that. But I dare say, and part of it is John himself putting it down and treating it like what it originally started as was a way to offset the costs that they incurred with the manufacturing and production of Metal Box. So if you take it out of that context, though, and this is what I meant when I said about potentially another Public Image Ltd. Archival release, the full shows for both the 17th and 18th are out there, and you can listen to them and judge them for yourself. A very, very nice person put the whole 18th show up on YouTube, so I'll definitely be linking to that. And I think that if this album had been presented differently and wasn't the immediate follow-up to the grand statement of the Metal Box, I think that it would be treated of more as the major statement that it in fact is. Because those two shows were exceptional. And I think if this had been presented as a double album, like if this was a 60-minute live album, and 15 on each side, I think this would be far more highly regarded, because Public Image Ltd. In Paris on those 2 nights with Martin Atkins installed were fucking exceptional. And they were kind of looser and more improvisational than they had been in any of the 79 shows. What they did on stage in Paris was far beyond what they did the previous year in Leeds, the last show with Dudansky. It's better than they were at I forget which one was which. The Leeds show with Joy Division and Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark. That was the Sci-Fi Music Festival or something. The one before that, the one that came out on the Metal Box reissue, They were better over the course of those 2 nights than they were at either of those shows. So I feel like there is a potentially masterful live album to be drawn from all of that. And if it had proper sound on it, that would be all the better. Proper sound could be achieved, and the way forward is just like on the songs from the Heart box set, the way that the Annalisa, the what is now going to be put out as the full U.S. version, the album, the U.S. version of Annalisa was on here. The third track on this is disc 4, the unreleased mixes and tracks, Careering. So Careering, this would be oh good lord, Careering from the 18th would be on here. Yeah, that makes sense. And so this sounds fucking amazing. The sound quality on here is incredible, and it suggests that yes, you could do a proper issuing or a proper sequencing. And expanded live albums at this point are par for the course. I mean, the Stop Making Sense has been expanded to great effect. Like the Who's Live at Leeds is probably the ultimate expanded live album, right? So Hendrix at Woodstock was expanded to. So I think that I don't even know that you would necessarily have to do both shows all the way through, but I think you could definitely do a really, really, really nice, solid, 2 double album set out of the best bits. Between the 2 shows, I'm not necessarily sure which one I prefer. I probably lean, at least on this, you would naturally lean, more towards the 17th than the 18th, because the recording is a little harder core, and Wobble is more, Wobble's just dominating things to glorious effect. So Paris. And I since I cut yesterday, this is the Rich of today, speaking about the Rich of yesterday now. Richie yesterday cut and rewatched the Martin Atkins interview with Eric Blair. Fucking great. And it's Paris au printemps, is how he said it. I don't know. So, but we'll talk about this album a little bit. It comes out. It actually gets released in November of 1980. But the painting is, because by this point there had been big changes in Pill, foreshadowing. So this is a John Lydon painting depicting. I would imagine this is him. John always depicts himself with teeth sticking out. I'm not really sure why he goes with that, but if you ever see the extras on the There Will Always Be in England. I'm sure this might be elsewhere, but they go back to the Cook. Maybe Jones too, but definitely Cook goes back to the original. Or is it Glenn Matlock now? Jesus Christ, that's embarrassing. One of them goes back and to the original Pistols practice room, and John had done mean-spirited caricatures, including himself, of all of the members, and including, he always was ribbing Steve Jones about his weight. So there's Fatty Jones, and I forget the other ones, but he always portrays himself like that. I'm not really sure what that's about. So, but I have to assume that's John, and then this would be Keith, which I think is a pretty good depiction of Keith, pretty funny. And then this mysterious figure is the ever mysterious Jeanette Lee, which kind of prefigures how she would appear on the cover of Flowers of Romance. So I like this artwork. I love the conceit of doing it all in French. I think that's hysterical. I love shit like this. Like, this is the sort of thing that puts a smile on my face. I love things like this. So is it as released? Oh, and so John always says that the reason why that the part of the reason why they were able to defray costs was John brought his Revox reel-to-reel over to Paris, and they just used that to record it. I guess they just plugged it into the soundboard and recorded off of that, and they got £30,000 from Virgin to do so. Critics tend to really put this record down, tend to really minimize it, tend to really minimize its importance, but it is, I mean, it's an official statement from the roughly original incarnation. I think that as long as Wobble I think as long as Wobble and or Levine are still around, I still refer to it as the original incarnation of Pill. To me, the original incarnation of Pill really does end when Keith leaves. So that, some people would declare that it's Wobble, but I have my own reasons for that. And hopefully over the course of these videos, that reasoning will become clear without, dragging it out too much. He says he's already done like 7 hours on these guys. So I think part of the problem of the misconception of this album and the misunderstanding of this live album, though, is theme, which, and I am gonna go through this. So theme is from the 18th, and theme takes a while to really get going, both in terms of Lydon's vocal performance, but really Keith. On this night, I don't know the name of the guitar that he's using, but he's not using the melting glass. I think it's the Travis Bean guitar that you normally have seen him playing up until this point. And I forget the name of the guitar that he's playing. Is it a Dan Armstrong? I don't remember. It might be a Dan Armstrong. It has a completely different sound, and it really, really, really alters how he plays. So what he's doing on this is far, far closer to what you would hear on maybe some of the stuff on Pop Tones, or some of the more frayed ends of Another or slash Graveyard. It's more of that, except it's not particularly distorted. It's kind of weirdly clean. And so it takes a while to get going. But about halfway through theme is where we really start to get into Keith doing synthesizer stuff. And the synthesizer stuff is what really carries the performance into another realm. Atkins is already great. Atkins is great with Wobble. Wobble is uniformly great. Wobble is basically just great all the time. And he is rock solid in that sense. So that's theme. It eventually works its way into being really, really, really amazing. And then we get into Chant. Chant is from the 17th. Chant is fucking incredible. Chant is absolutely amazing. Chant is also amazing on the 18th. So when you check out the 18th show, which you should, incredible. Like they are absolutely brutal on Chant. And I'm actually gonna pull the record out for track times. Chant is coming in at around 4.5 minutes, and it's everything you would want from them. I mean, Levine is amazing, Lydon is amazing. The rhythm section, I mean, this I do declare that this is the definitive rhythm section. Martin Atkins, I think, again, like I made the Bill Stevenson comparison in the 79 video, Martin Atkins marks out his sonic identity, and he merges with Wobble. He's the definitive guy. I know that Jim Walker has become the darling, but Jim Walker left, and there's Jim Walker just isn't around enough, you know. So Jim Walker becomes to me more of the Chuck Biscuits of Pill. But Martin Atkins is the fucking man. And as we get into, you know, the next video, the 1981 video, we're going to be getting into great detail about how much Martin Atkins is the fucking man. So that's the guy that I look at. I mean, the Four Faces of Pill, to me, one of those is Martin Atkins. He's the guy, period, as far as I'm concerned. So and he proves it with performances like Chant. It's incredible. It's incredible both nights. And then we get to and this is this also from the 17th? I want to say that it is. Yes, it is. So again, the 17th recordings are harder core and fuller and more like blood and guts and what you really want. The 18th recordings are a little weaker. I'm not really sure why. Not the performances, but the recordings. But we get to the absolute indisputable highlight of this album, and that is the version of Careering from the 17th. The version of Careering from the 17th is as good as the Peel session that I went on about in the 1979 video. They slow it down. It's about 7 minutes, or nearly 7 minutes, and it is 7 of the most imposing, intense, and yet danceable fucking minutes of music that you are ever going to hear. Levine goes from peak to peak in terms of the synth work and using his guitar as a percussion device between the synths and the guitar. So he's playing the Prophet. It's a Prophet synthesizer, but I don't know if it's the Prophet 5. I think it might be, or maybe the Prophet 5 came later. But it's a Prophet, and I mean the back and forth, and then at the same time, because he would set sustain on the Prophet. Like, absolutely incredible. I mean, this is everything I love about Keith Levine. This is like why he's so heroic to me. Like, this is why I revere him so much, that he's doing this all in real time in front of a fucking audience, and that there is that improvisational aspect to it. The fact that the tempo is slowed down somehow really only improves things. It makes it that much more of I don't know, of a tank rolling on a beach coming at you. And it's 7 of the best fucking minutes of music that they ever recorded, which means that it's 7 of the best minutes of music ever recorded. This is the definitive lineup. I mean, this is it's just mind-boggling. And because they're doing it slower, just the fact that Wobble, again, you need to, you know, I always think about this when I listen to great funk music. You know, when you listen to Deep by Parliament, and they're doing that for 8 minutes or whatever, it's like, that's not a loop. That's not samples. That is human beings holding that tempo and holding that groove. Like, that is one of the greatest things in the world to be able to do, man. That's superhuman stuff. I love that. Man, that rhythm section, fucking Atkins and Wobble, my god, they're fucking great. And to hold that tempo, and then for Lydon to do what he does over it, high point. That enough. The performance of Careering on here enough you can determine this album is this live album is a masterpiece just off of that version of Careering. If you listen to nothing else, if I can convince you of nothing else, listen to the version of Careering. It's so amazing. Also, this album has been dinged for bad production. What are you talking about? It's especially the recordings from the 17th are incredible. And again, judging off of this, now this Careering is good, but it's at normal tempo. It's just it's awesome. It is amazing. But if the Peel session and this, the 17th, are the two dueling ultimate high-level perfection, how the fuck did they do that sort of thing, right? This is just like one notch below that, just because we're talking about degrees of perfection, degrees of awesomeness, degrees of fearlessness, degrees of exploration, right? So, but again, the recording on this suggests that you could clean up the 18th recordings, have it match the fidelity of the 17th recordings, pick the best ones. It's not that hard because they're kind of all the best ones. And reissue this as a fucking double album. It's easy. It's easy. And this suggests that somebody's already cleaned it up. So it's easy. Get on that. I will buy that shit in a heartbeat. So, and I would hope that you would too, because it's banging. So, we flip the record over, and we get to side 2. You didn't see that one coming. You don't usually get from side 1 to side 2 on a record, huh? It's kind of weird shit. So anyway, side 2 opens up with Bad Baby. Is Bad Baby from the 18th? Yes, it is. Keith's guitar is really weird and spindly on this stuff. It's really strange stuff. Also, the other thing that's interesting to note is how he doesn't quite replicate Lydon's synths from what's on the studio version. I find that interesting. It all winds up, or really what he does is he's doing on the synth what he does with the near quotations, the near yes quotations, and Swan Lake quotations and the Spanish quotations on Metal Box. He just uses that as variations and jumping off points. But Bad Baby is great. It's another great performance. Then we get Low Life, and Low Life is from the 18th. Low Life is also great. It's kind of a piece with Bad Baby. Lydon sings it incredibly. Lydon is the best part of that performance. His voice is absolutely soaring and hitting all kinds of crazy notes and incredible. And then we get Attack, one of my favorite songs. It's from the 17th. I would arguably say that maybe it might overall be the weakest performance on here. It's still really cool. I'm really glad that it's on this. It's still fantastic. But again, with Public Image Ltd, I mean, you can afford to be picky because they operate at such an insanely high level. And then the album closes out with Pop Tones, also from the 17th. It's awesome. It's amazing. Like they take the studio experiment of Pop Tones and they translate it into a live setting, and they do so to great effect. And Martin Atkins absolutely fucking nails it. So, Pill in Paris, there's a lot of great music there. And, I think that, if you really love the first album, right, that this should be an easy go-to, because it's kind of, at its best, especially Careering, it basically has the sort of live band feel. I mean, there's obviously a liveness to Metal Box, of course, but it has that live band feel, because it's a live record, of course, but translated to some of the Metal Box material, and it's really, really cool. And this is a little gem. Is it perfect as is? No, but that's okay, because you can also just go listen to the complete shows, and the complete shows, like, they did some incredible improvisational music on those 2 nights in Paris. You can also watch 3 performances. I wish the whole thing was out there. It fucking should be. But again, if the new mix of Annalisa was the queuing up of down the road the eventual release of the US version of the first album, then please let this version of Careering Here, please let that be the queuing up of an expanded Paris au printemps that we can all revel in and be like, holy shit, they're the best band in the world. They're the governors of post-punk, to polish that one off. So that's Public Image Limited in Paris. The other thing that happens in January, one of the emerging themes of this video is that this is where... So when they're in their own little world, like those 2 nights in Paris, Public Image Limited is still incredibly highly functioning and making great art, able to just generate ideas on the spot, and all that combustibility results in incredible art just kind of being generated in real time, right? But this is where reality and the real corporations are imposing, and the real world is imposing, and the combustibility is, and the very, very divergent personalities of the people involved are starting to fracture things. So in January of 1980, Wobble grabs Martin Atkins. They got on. Martin Atkins talks about this in the Public Image is Rotten documentary, that he wasn't particularly close with any of the other members. He would go hang out at Gunter Grove, and he would go and get paid, and he would apparently obtain speed there as well, which was what he was into, and that. At some point in there, so Wobble was kind of the only one that he was close to, and at some point Wobble basically said that he wanted to go, kind of as Public Image Limited had already been functioning in the final, quarter or so of making Metal Box, that he was going to go and create backing tracks for the next Pill album. So they were working for a few weeks. The timelines vary depending on the interviews. But they go to Gooseberry Studios, and with engineer Mark Lasardi, who winds up playing guitar on that. And that is the beginning of... It's not for Public Image Limited at all. It is, in fact, for Jaw Wobble's solo album, the Betrayal album. So, but Wobble didn't know, Atkins didn't know. He thought they were just recording what would ostensibly be the beginnings of what would be the third Public Image Limited album. On January 30th of that year, there is, in Holland, there is, I'm not even a Muziekkrant, OOR magazine, publishes a really, really, really interesting interview with Lydon, and there is a description of Gunter Grove that I find really, really interesting. A house dark in Chelsea, the windows sealed, up from the inside with tinted plastic foil. I ring the bell and nothing happens. Foreshadowing. Banging the door doesn't help either. I decide to wait in a nearby pub and try it again sometime later. The descriptions, apparently Lydon did all of his press out of Gunter Grove at this point, or nearly all of it, at least for the next few months, and descriptions of the dankness, darkness, and imposing atmosphere of Gunter Grove are in each of these articles, and the fact that the windows were sealed, either with foil or plastic, and that there was no sense of sort of time once you were inside the house, and that basically everybody lived there, including Levine. So the psychology of the house, I feel like, and I talked about this a little bit in the last video, and I guess in the 78 video, but the psychology of the house really kind of informs Public Image Limited at this point as much as anything else does, and that's really interesting. But also in that interview, Lydon does talk about his production work, and I'll link to this if I can find it. His brother, is it Jimmy Lydon? I forget. The 4B2s, or for years, I didn't know that that's how it was pronounced. I thought it was 4 inches, B2 inches. I didn't know any better. But it's a cool recording. It's fun. So that Lydon apparently just drank champagne and then eventually passed out. And that's how that single was realized. So, now we can move right along. February the 5th, Public Image Ltd. finally records their Old Grey Whistle test performance. So, because they had canceled the previous month, of course, because they were sick. On this day, Lydon notes, we were all on something and none of it was legal. So I feel kind of explains the general, like the general ethos of the time. But so this is like, the Old Grey Whistle test. I mean, they're in kind of the center of the British musical establishment at that point. Though I don't know what the status of Old Grey Whistle test is here in America. We just get that sort of thing in dribs and drabs, right? So I don't know if Whispering Rolf Harris was still around. He must have been, huh? I can't imagine that he wasn't, but in clips from this time, like when you see like The Damned or something, it's always Anne Nightingale doing the introduction. So I don't know enough of the history of Old Grey Whistle test. I don't know if Rolf did more like the Mick Jagger interviews, that sort of, and Ian Anderson or something like that. I don't know, but they are introduced by Anne Nightingale, and it is the first that we see of second edition. Yes. So and she notes that it's sold. The metal box was sold out, but you can purchase the second edition. So to which she hands up to Lydon, because Lydon is using the back as a lyric sheet. He has a music stand, so the album goes right, back facing front, right up on the lyric stand, so he can read the lyrics. Because Lydon is notoriously bad at remembering his own lyrics, which I can sympathize with greatly. So anyway, the Old Grey Whistle test performance. So that is captured. Where is it? That is captured on here on Songs from the Heart on disc 7. So they do pop tones and they do careering. I had originally seen them on here. So I'm trotting this out yet again, and then obviously it was ported over onto DVD box. So I had seen these in pretty bad fidelity. This was a revelation. There's a decent version of it now out on YouTube, the whole performance. That's I would assume probably ripped from this. It's maybe slightly downgraded, but let us talk about that performance. So, first of all, this is, and sometimes you'll see still photos of this in articles about them or in books or something. This is the performance where Lydon is wearing the red top coat. Lydon wearing the red top coat is the sartorial summation of Public Image Ltd. For me. That shade of red, that sort of that ostentatious of an object as a visual signifier is one of the coolest fucking looking things I've ever seen. I am obsessed with the red top coat. It looks fucking incredible. The reason I focus on their clothing and all the little things, the mismatched socks, the mismatched trousers to suit coats, all of that is because to me that's an outgrowth of their musical aesthetics. As I've said before in many videos, the great David Lee Roth quote of music should look how it sounds. Pill looks how it sounds. And that's part of what I find so fascinating are the mismatched elements, the formal elements being sort of either the wrong size, but it all works and it all looks perfect. And it's always the right choice. Like Wobble wearing the powder blue sport coat, it's exactly right. What's his face? Martin Atkins is wearing the OG Public Image Ltd clothes that were made for them that I talked about in the 78 video. So he's wearing the multi-exposed John Lydon faces shirt. He has that on, which I think is funny and really cool. So this is Atkins's debut performance, and so Pop Tones begins a little slow. It's a little tentative, but once they get going, they get going, and they are perfect. And Levine is perfect. And again, Levine as a physical entity, and as this sort of, the way Levine moves while he's playing is, it evokes what Iggy talked about with going to see the blues players in Chicago and playing drums with the original Chicago blues guys, of where that it was just like coming off of them, and it was an extension of their physical bodies, and that the music to coming out was directly related to how they were physically playing it, how they were physically moving, and that it's a direct extension. So what is coming through them is exactly what's coming out. And in that sense, you understand Lydon's frustration with talking about, and Martin Atkins's frustration with talking about them as performance art, as conceptual art. You get it, because it's so naturalistic and it's so real that the suggestion of any intellectual conceit would have to seem ridiculous to them. When John is, I don't want to be called a poet. That's their labels. That's I get all of that. On the other hand, it is a performance. They are highly intelligent, and you can't help but analyze it that way and think about it that way. It can't help it. I think the people, and I would include myself on this, sort of don't know what to do when you have something that highly, 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 highly intelligent and that naturalistic and that real. Because normally the more highly intelligent, the more of a contrivance it is, and people can jack off. They could endlessly jack themselves off to the levels of contrivance, right? And go down the hall of mirrors and convince themselves that it is what it is not, So Levine is just sort of somehow like the perfect physical embodiment of all of this, and his playing is absolutely incredible. He's back to the I'm calling it the Travis Bean guitar. Fucking incredible. Like that guitar tone, that style, that wandering, and to get to watch it, but that wandering playing that he does. Wobble, by the way, is also now standing up. Jaw Wobble is now up on his feet the entire time. Incredible. So, and fully engaged with Martin Atkins. He is not sitting on a folding chair facing away from the drummer any longer. So that's also another very important development. So Pop Tones and Lydon's performance of Pop Tones, where he looks like he's about to crack at different points, where he's just emanating out the word drive. And I like I said before, I saw Lydon in 2010, and he did in fact cry during, he had tears streaming down his face as he was doing Death Disco. It looks like he's on the verge of it here, and it's just such an otherworldly performance, absolutely incredible. There was a lot of other great music at this time. There was no shortage of great British bands. There was no shortage of great British post-punk bands. But again, these guys are the fucking governors. These guys are operating at a whole other level. Again, the only other stuff fucking with them at this point would have been Joy Division and the Raincoats, I think. Not to disrespect anybody else. I love the pop group. I love the Buzzcocks were in full flight at this time. There's lots of other amazing music. But overachieving on every single level across the spectrum, that you have the best frontman, the best lyricist, the best singing, the best guitar player, the best bass player. Now, is Martin Atkins the best drummer? I don't know. I would have to really think about that. But if he's not the best drummer, he's up in the top fucking range, and he's complementing this entire band, and the music is now fully resting on his shoulders. So that's a testament to the greatness of Martin Atkins. Visually, they're perfect. The best records, the best singles, like they are, way, way, way out in front. Nobody's touching these guys. Nobody. And then they go into careering. In the process of making this video and listening to a lot of live shows and really digging into them in Paris and watching this performance a few times, I've started to consider something I never would have thought of if I weren't making these videos, which is careering the single best thing the Public Image Ltd ever did? Because every single performance of careering is a motherfucker. They did it again. Now, I am of the opinion, if I'm going to be persnickety, that it doesn't go quite as hard as the Peel session from the year before. However, this is still pretty unbelievable. It is a few minutes shorter. It doesn't quite go all the way out into the fucking outer rings of fucking Saturn and back. It is a bit more contained, but part of the joy of it is getting to see Levine in like high quality, because there's a camera directly in front of the Prophet 5, fucking do that, like watching him do it and watching him like flip switches and push keys down and then immediately go back to his guitar, because he has to do all of that because he's keeping time, because there's such a bop 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 bop, like there's the dot 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 dot, like he's like an additional percussionist on his guitar. So he's doing all of that and keeping time with Atkins. Come on. Like, there's a reason I revere these people, right? And the careering this is the proof. Like, this is the justification for all of my endless swooning about these guys. Like, this is it. Like, this is the goods. It's not theoretical. It's not abstract. It's not about obsessing over the potentiality of what they could have achieved or any of that shit. Here it is, all the way, full on, in pristine quality that you can like absorb and have endless inspiration for fucking years from, right? As I have, or as lots of other people around the world have, right? It's just that fucking glorious to watch. Also, by the way, Lydon at the end of Pop Tones doffs the red top coat and has this, like, I love it, like kind of Lord of the Manor fucking, I guess it's like tweed suit on. Like, come on, like, again, it's perfect. It's perfect. But that version of careering, what Levine is doing with the synths, and there have been people who have made tatty comments over the years that Levine didn't know what he was doing on synthesizers. Oh, that why was this great guitar player fucking about with machines that he couldn't understand how they work? Watch this performance. Like, watch his fucking hands. Watch his hands on a guitar and watch his hands on the Prophet as he's like doing like bop, 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 like immediately flipping and changing settings and hitting keys and then going back to his guitar and playing in time. Like, watch all that and tell me that he doesn't know how to operate this. Come on, that's silly. That's silly. Like, the range of tones and textures, what he's doing with harmonics, like, amazing. And then using the guitar as a percussion device, an amplified percussion device. Absolutely incredible. These guys, again, they are the fucking governors. Nobody's fucking with them. Like, on an artistic level, on a musical level, they are totally radiant and perfect. So that is the Old Grey Whistle Test performance. At the end of it, Anne Nightingale herself says, and I quote, "The most powerful performance I've ever seen on Whistle Test." And you sit there and you watch it and you go, Anne, you are not wrong. So anyway, On February the 9th, Wobble does an interview with NME and talks about Pill. But this, I'm just including this because I find it interesting. He actually talks about how he achieves his sound. I use a 15-inch speaker and turn it up against the wall, putting mics around the room so they pick everything up. That's my huge trade secret. It isn't hard, end quote. So I think I alluded to that maybe in the 78 video, but that is the actual quote that I was pulling it from. As I think now, I don't think it's any longer an emerging theme of this video and the next one. I think now it is perhaps just going to be a theme of this video of the real world invading the pill bubble and the interference that they had to contend with. On February the 13th of 1980, at dawn, Gunter Grove is raided by the police. It is the first of many, 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 many raids. It turns out that there was a police training center just down the street from where Lydon lived. So after the first few raids, they just started doing it as a matter of training would-be policemen. So, the raid, though, on Gunter Grove specifically, is looking for drugs, and what they find is, unfortunately, one of the other lasting effects of Public Image Ltd. In Paris. Whilst in Paris, a fan gave John Lydon a bottle of pepper spray, which was common in America at the time. It was not common in England, apparently. My mom carried pepper spray for years. We lived in grew up in an area that was, you could say working class, and there was as we were there was a rougher element that formed, we will say. So yeah, and my first girlfriend lived in that area. By that point, there was out and out gang warfare, and that was one of the first things that my mom did after I'd been dating her for like a month or something. She was like, you should have pepper spray. So pepper spray was a pretty normal thing in my household. So Lydon has this thing of this tiny little thing of pepper spray, which was illegal in England, and he gets charged under the Firearms Act. So that's the first raid, and that raid was used to justify every subsequent raid, lots of people like to be tough or pretend they're tough or pretend they're punk rock or pretend they're confrontational. Lydon had a ceremonial sword in his bedroom and confronted the raiding police with the sword until they were able to produce a warrant. So, sometimes people like to take cheap shots at John. And you look at his history, you look at like him being, attacked on the street multiple times, when he was in the Pistols, getting stabbed, then getting to the hospital and being arrested for under suspicion of having caused his own stabbing. You look at the things that he lived with, and people need to back the fuck off with taking shots at him, because none of these people chilling on the internet have lived the life that he did. And ask yourself, if you're watching this and you like taking shots at him, as a lot of people do, ask yourself, would you have the bottle to confront the raiding police in your home with a sword? Be honest. So the raids basically just start to pick up and continue over the next basically year and a half. One was conducted under the idea of looking for runaway minors. And then the last one, which was in 81, was the seeking and seizure of illegal weapons. So the other thing is around this time, or after this first raid, Lydon's phone is tapped. And apparently a MI5 agent, David Shaler, did confirm that Lydon was a target for having his phone tapped. So, you know, people are in love with the idea of being outlaws and portraying themselves in certain ways. You know, it's much tougher to actually be one, and what that does to you, what that does to those around you, what that does to your nervous system. So, you know, I think that you know, I give a wide berth for people who actually live it and actually do it, and not pontificate about it. On February the 22nd, second edition is finally released. And this is what is, of course, then released in the United States. Chris Blackwell is back in action, and I don't know if he had given up on the reggae answer to Saturday Night Fever yet, with John Lydon starring. Maybe I would want that to have happened. What the fuck? You cannot wrap your mind around that. Can you imagine, okay. So anyway, I could just make the video about that, but apparently Chris Blackwell steps in and is a big part of the reason why this got released in America. But like England, so England got 50,000 copies of the Metal Box. They printed 50,000 of these for the whole of the United States. So pretty bad. You're hamstringing the potentiality of the audience, and I don't really understand what the point of that is. When I talked about in the last video about Pill's reality versus the perceived snobbishness of them, and having to shell out crazy import prices for imports or that sort of thing, that the reality of them and the getting screwed around and manipulated, or the manipulation of them, this is an example of that. You know, this wasn't their idea. This wasn't some strategy. It wasn't some art piece. It was not them being arrogant or blasé to their audience. They wanted the music out there. That was part of the reason they didn't try. Because Pill, during this time, so in England, you had the takeoff of the indies, and especially Rough Trade was really up and running. You also had Factory Records by this point, right, with Joy Division. And the Pill talked about that those records still only were reaching a limited audience, and that, first of all, John was under contract from the Pistols, so they didn't have a choice in the matter anyway. But on top of that they wanted their music out there. You know, they weren't into the idea of being obscure. They wanted to be out there. They wanted to be in the culture, and you know, they would constantly say things like, we're not hiding in a corner. And so, you know, I think that perception, and the perception of them somehow that they're ripping people off, or that they don't care if people are getting ripped off, all that sort of stuff, that wasn't emanating from them. That wasn't by their design, by any of their designs. And I think that is something, as I talk about them, that kind of needs to be understood. Because, you know, I perceived when I was early on finding out who John Lydon was, I perceived it as a form of snootiness, right? Whereas the people who were like sucking up on MTV seemed more like regular folk who just wanted to entertain you. And I think that, especially with America, I think that perception gets flipped around very, very easily and turned into something that it isn't. So I say all that because, yeah, it was the result of the record label being fucking twats, not them saying, oh, these dumb Americans will charge them double what they would normally pay. Screw them. You know, that's not the case at all. In March 15th of 1980, in the U.S. press, word starts to get out that Public Image Ltd. Will be doing a U.S. tour with the intent to play unusual venues. Lydon and Levine go to America to promote the release of second edition, and they do a whole series of interviews. Lydon and Levine do this whole series of interviews, and Levine mentioned in multiple interviews getting sponsorships from ITT and trying to not get money for films and records from Warner Brothers. He seems particularly interested in divesting from Warner Brothers at this point. One of the other things that is really interesting, speaking of John Lydon in the red top coat, is there's a photo that I've seen many, many times of Lydon, and I'm going to find it and throw it up. So Rich, prompt, now's the time, as you edit this at some point in the future, to throw the photo up there, Rich. And I've seen it, but Lydon is sort of modeling the red top coat in Gunter Grove. And it's interesting because there's Pill posters and the Sex Pistols' God Save the Queen single release poster. I want to say it's been a while since I've seen it behind him. So it's interesting to see those next to each other. But also up there is a print of Margaret Thatcher's face sort of superimposed over the Warhol print of Marilyn Monroe. And I always saw that little work of art and thought it was pretty funny and a good laugh and liked it. It turns out that was given to him as a birthday present, or not a birthday present, but it was given to him by Jeanette Lee. So she found that somewhere and gave that to him, and that's noted in an article. So I always had liked that when I saw it in photos, and I thought that was pretty cool finding that out. So the ripple effect from the Leeds gig really continues out in terms of Pill talking about how they didn't want to tour. They originally, Warner Brothers wanted them to do 40 shows in America, and Lydon and Levine outright refused that. And even though they now had a coherent, playing situation with Atkins really fitting into the group, the ripple effect of that is just really interesting because their perception of the press seems to have been somewhat changed as well by that Leeds gig, in terms of, are they lazy jerks, who aren't serving the public particularly. So on March 3rd of 1980, Lydon and Levine, they're in America, they're doing all these interviews, and they do a press conference in San Francisco at the City. And the press conference is filmed by Target Video. I first saw it, I want to say it's on here, but Target Video put it in, it pops up in a few other places as well. And is it on here? I don't think it's on here. It might be on DVD box, but that was where I first saw it. It's on YouTube. I'll put it out there. It's unfortunately just under 3 minutes, but that 3 minutes is amazing. Now I forget which interview it is. The Record Mirror, I want to say, and I'll link to that article. So the Record Mirror covers that press conference in greater detail, but actually getting to see them talk and just the humor and the moment somebody says to Levine, "What were you doing before you were in Pill?" And he just says, "Oh, I was on the dole," usual punk things, very blasé. And there's a pause and somebody yells out, "Are you a punk?" And it's my favorite moment. Lydon belches. And Levine just goes, "Yeah, aren't I outrageous?" And then there's a pause, and he goes, "Are you a hippie?" Oh, and he's missing a fucking tooth. So he's so it's that much. Oh, it's so fucked up. It's so great. And just, "Are you a hippie?" Oh my God, love it. Oh, it's so withering. I love these disagreeable little bastards. They're sort of my favorite people. I love these guys. So that just I loved watching the footage of that press conference and just wish that just wish that we could get to see the entire thing. Target Video, if it's out there, please, guys, come on. If it's out there, let's do it. Let's do it. Your stuff is all being transferred in MoMA or whatever. Like, let's get that out there. Come on, do a service to the greater culture. Do it for the culture. So, like, it's the other fun thing to note. Foreshadowing is somebody asks Keith what he likes. Let's remember this question, because somebody asks Keith what he likes. Some of you will already know what I'm getting at. And there's a pause and he just says, milkshakes. So, which is greeted very weirdly enthusiastically by one of the people there. The other thing, it's been a long time since I saw this, but apparently Flipper snuck into the press conference or something, or they were putting up flyers around. I forget, but yeah. So the other thing is, I want to say that this is when it was this visit to San Francisco that results in those photos that you see. I'll see if I can find one. Well, Rich, if you can find it. But I think this is where the photos of John Lydon carrying the Dead Kennedys single comes from. And I always thought that was pretty cool that John had bought a Dead Kennedys single. I fucking love that. So, at any rate, yeah, I think Flipper tried to get in, or there was some sort of commotion involving Flipper, kind of on the outskirts of this event. So that's also pretty cool. April 1980 begins with a really good interview that Lydon did with Smash Hits. Great line. All the idiots only learnt the first lesson of punk. First lesson, do it yourself. Second lesson, do it properly, which I absolutely love as a quote. Also, just to bear in mind, in April of 1980, John Lydon turned 24. So, again, think about what you were up to at 24, and pretty remarkable. These were very, very remarkable young men. Also around this time in the press, Dave Crow. So Jeanette Lee started getting really mentioned in 79. Dave Crow is now starting to get mentioned, at least during this brief period, around as much, about as much as Jeanette Lee is, which I find interesting. I guess, I don't know if it was specifically a birthday present to himself, but that year John Lydon purchased his own tombstone, and thought it was pretty funny to have that just out in Gunter Grove. He also, as a number of people remarked, or reporters remarked at this time when they were coming to Gunter Grove to do the interviews, he had made a statue of a rubber. Was it a rubber Jesus doll with Jimmy Carter's head attached that I guess he'd cut out of the newspaper and glued it. So it was either that or a rubber baby, which is interesting. Also, at this time, John let loose the claim that in that Smash Hits article, John let loose the claim that, and I don't know how true this is. I don't know if he was winding the reporter up. I really don't know. I don't think I've seen any evidence to support this. I really, really don't know. But it is pretty awesome if this is true, that him and Sid apparently supervised or did their own mix of the entirety of Nevermind the Bollocks, which was rejected. So I can only imagine what that would have sounded like. And who knows like how true or how realistic that is. I truly don't know. And just leading up to Public Image Ltd. Leaving for the American tour, Wobble released the single Betrayal from his upcoming album. There's going to be a lot more to this. A lot more to this. Really, really strange story as the video develops. So, but that was the beginning of it. So around April 15th, April 16th, Public Image Ltd flies to America to begin their U.S. tour. So Warner Brothers had wanted 40 shows. Pill said 10. And it was... They really insisted on booking their own dates and only dealing with promoters who they wanted to deal with directly. But, Warner Brothers brought in the Premier Talent Agency to book shows and then to squeeze out the local promoters. So, again, the outside world, interfering with Public Image Ltd. As they try to go more out into the world. There you have it. It's not great. So the U.S. tour begins, and again, this is worth noting. They hadn't played in America. The Sex Pistols had done, 1 week or 2 weeks in America at the beginning of 1978. So it's a couple full years later, and and when Pill were the only sort of city that would have been sort of welcoming to them would have been San Francisco, which was the last show of the tour, which is when they broke up, of course. So there were all these cities, there was all this, all these places in America that just hadn't seen them. So the tour begins on April 18th at the Orpheum in Boston. The opening act was apparently something called Human Sexual Response. The reviews from the 2000s that are on Fodderstomp assert that Human Sexual Response apparently totally fucking sucked. I have not listened to Human Sexual Response, so I cannot say for sure. So the Orpheum show is a really interesting one. Sound quality. Oh, and this is where I might as well talk about this. Back in the late 2000s, early 2010s, somewhere in there, I really couldn't remember exactly when, there was a blogger site. So I had a computer that got hacked pretty hard. I came home from work one day and there was a literal, what do you call it? Like the needles in hospitals, where they get deposited, the contraband sign, like that weird circle thing. So I came home and that was my desktop. It was a really, really, really nasty virus that had gone round, and I wasn't apparently a lot of people had gotten hit with this. And so I really screwed my computer up and I lost a bunch of stuff on it. But and then I lost another bunch of stuff that I had downloaded, because this was the era where I was downloading a lot of music that I just wouldn't have been able to access otherwise. So this was kind of in my downloading Zappa phase, and like different bootlegs and stuff, right? So I was pretty into that, and there was a blogger site that I had found. I downloaded like a ton of Prince albums that were either fan club only or he just like stuff he just was selling at shows. So this was that period for me. And there was a blogger site called that I remembered being called Acid Drops, and they had tons and tons and tons of Public Image Ltd concerts available for download. And that was kind of that glorious era where you could specifically search blogger sites, and you could find nearly any like bootleg that you wanted to find. So I found all sorts of really weird, obscure stuff. And blogger sites were great for that. There was a SST one that had like the Minutemen My First Bells compilation that I found, and some really obscure SST stuff. So I remembered this site. Like, I had downloaded a bunch of concerts from this site and was super into it. And then if I didn't lose them in that computer hack, I think I lost them. I lost them a few years later when I had gotten this laptop that like I had made customized. So it was like supercharged for like film editing, and like it basically was like a gaming computer, except the idea was to use it for film and sound editing, right? And so, and it was like, for a laptop, because of the extra memory and everything it required, it was like that thick. It was like a, it was like a dictionary almost. And the whole idea of it was that I was going to have that laptop for like 10 or 15 years. And it wound up being a lemon. And I lost everything on it. Like, that was a pretty devastating. It was so bad that the desktop that I've had ever since, they actually paid for the desktop. Like, they had fucked up the motherboard and the BIOS, that it couldn't allow any further BIOS updates. So that was pretty bad. So at some point I lost everything I had downloaded. And back when I was doing the 78, 79 videos, I remembered them, and I was going to talk about that site in a similar way to how I talk about fodderstomp.com. And it's like, that's got to be long gone by now. So for the purposes of making this video, I started looking around to see if I could find additional Pill concerts from the U.S. tour. And there was apparently a Clash chat board from like 2014 or something. And I was like, this is amazing. And it had all these links, and like these people were really intense about it. And I was like, this is the best. I got it. And I go to open up the first link, and I hadn't checked what the link led to. And so I just click on it, and what comes up but hentai porn, which is not fucking great on your fucking work computer, is it? So hentai porn was like, no. So anyway, so I was like, I wonder if I can find that goddamn Acid Drops blog. Like, what are the, like, and I took like 4 or 5 different cracks at it, starting like, I don't know, 3 weeks ago. And I wouldn't get anywhere. And god damn it, about 4 or 5 nights ago, I found the goddamn thing, and all of it's intact. So I downloaded all of the extant shows from the 1980 tour. How amazing is that? Plus, it has the full pair of shows. It has the shows I talked about in 78 and 79, even though, those are already out on YouTube. Unbelievable. So I have actually been able to listen to anything that is on that blog. I will be linking to that blog. That blog is still a going concern. It's actually called Pillhead. So Pillhead, incredible. So I will be linking to that. They have updates as recent as last year. All the links appear to work. Incredible, incredible. So anyway, so the Boston show. So I've been binge listening, to Pill in 1980, like on a level that I didn't even think I was going to be able to, quite honestly. So I might get a couple details wrong here and there, because I mean, at some point I've now listened to umpteen versions of each of these songs, but I will try to succinctly run through. So the Boston show is a really interesting one because it's the longest show of the tour. It's really, 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 it is a long show. It is really, really loose as hell. And it's open-ended and experimental to a degree that I was kind of surprised by. And so it is also where they debuted the song Home is Where the Heart Is. Now, Home is Where the Heart Is, of course, has those lyrics. What is it? Isn't nature wonderful, spreading itself all over the place? I forget the exact lyric, but there's the nature about there's the line about nature sort of reclaiming its space. So we'll file that foreshadowing. So we will file that away for the time being. But yes, this is the debut of Home is Where the Heart Is. So the show is really, really cool. There's a lot of just bass and drum jamming. There seems to be some confusion as to whether Levine walked off due to sound problems. But it's a really cool show. I really like it. It is long and loose, and certainly worth hearing if you want to do the deeper dive. 2 days later, on April the 20th, Public Image Ltd. played The Palladium, which, from what I understand about The Palladium, was more of like where like the young Madonna would have played. Like the Palladium wasn't, it was somewhat more, I guess, somewhat more of a mainstream venue than what you would expect for Public Image Ltd to do. But this was a show that they, from what I understand, they themselves would not have booked, and they were not particularly happy about it. Now, in the Public Image is Rotten documentary, the editing of that, of Martin Atkins telling the famous story about John and Keith walking off, is edited slightly to give the impression that they didn't actually perform for that long. Some reviews online talk about how John and Keith walked off after about 30 minutes. None of that really is true. There is a full audience tape. And there's actually multiple generations of audience tapes. I think Pillhead had the second one. The third one appears to be the full show. They still played for about 70 minutes, give or take. But John and Keith did walk off at around the 1 hour mark. But it is not an incomplete show. Now, one thing that starts happening in Boston is the phenomenon of John like handing over the mic to people in the crowd. So this gets taken to its kind of ridiculous extreme at this Palladium show, where they actually perform some of the songs multiple times, and John just gives the mic over completely, and in fact doesn't sing at all. The sound quality that I have is a little ropey. Apparently there is a third generation. Keith had claimed that the show had been broadcast over New York radio. The theory is that the third generation recording, which is the clearest, is out there, and that's the best way to hear it. I did find that, so I don't know, and I can't speak to it. But Pill themselves did not like the show, and did not like that they had been booked into this place. So there's that show has kind of been mired in controversy for a very long time. But the fact of the matter is they played a pretty decent long set before they checked out. Before John and Keith checked out, and Wobble and Atkins just play together for a little while. Now, 2 days after that, however, Pill played a show that they booked themselves. Part of the reason they booked themselves is they determined that they weren't really going to be making any money off this tour, so them booking this show themselves ensured that they would have some cash in hand as they traversed their way across the United States of America. So they played a gig in the Bowery at a place called Great Gildersleeves, and Jeanette Lee apparently knew of local filmmaker Pete Doherty and agreed, so by this point, Pill is very deep into we're not a band, we're a corporation, and we're making films, and we're going to be making films. Keith announced that the next album, more or less announced at the San Francisco press conference, that the next album they put out would be a video album. So they were very, very hot on this idea. They wanted to have a combination of Super 8 and video and contrast and make experimental films. This was a very big deal. A little bit of that, what could be some of that footage, is out there on the internet. Mostly John Lydon's brother and Keith playing a game of snooker at Gunter Grove. I don't know. Again, I don't know what the intention for that would have been. But like Jeanette Lee at one point is holding like film lighting, like she's in it for like 2 seconds. So, this was where their heads were at, and this is what they were. So Pete Doherty has a crew. I want to say it's 3 cameras, and they actually film the Great Gildersleeves show. The whole show was filmed, but Pete Doherty edited 5 songs from the show. That was one of the major reasons. And the San Francisco press conferences on here and on here. But the Great Gildersleeves show, the 5 songs are here. Now, eventually, the whole audio from the whole show made its way out into the internet and onto the wonderful Flowers of Romance channel that I've previously mentioned. I will be linking to that because this show is transcendental in its fucking power. It is an incredible, incredible performance. So the 5 songs that were filmed were Careering, Public Image, Another, Low Life, and Bad Baby. So Careering, because Pete Doherty edited, and he did an interview with Fodder Stomp, I'll be linking to that, but Pete Doherty edited sort of contemporary news footage and did like digital video overlays of like stuff from the Troubles and the installation of the Shah of Iran, I would have to imagine, over the band. And it's, again, very sort of experimental, and it kind of weaves back and forth. The performance of Careering, this is another unbelievable performance. It is, I mean, the sheer power and intensity of it is just extraordinary. And again, to watch them play, because there's scant film footage of the band actually playing during this time. So to actually watch Wobble in the striped, black and white striped t-shirt, like skin tight, like playing his ass off, to watch him and Atkins, and then to watch Levine, and to watch Levine operate the synth, and he's strictly on the Travis Bean guitar. And then there's Lydon, and Lydon is in a tartan suit. Lydon is absolutely fucking incredible, and his vocals on Careering this is another like top of the mountain performance. It's incredible. And I know in the last video I made the comparison with Lydon and Levine of a Miles and Coltrane thing, because Levine is playing 2 instruments at one time in effect here. I would have to somewhat amend that comparison to Miles and Rashawn Roland Kirk, because Jesus fucking Christ. And Levine's switching back and forth, and he's less percussive than he is on the old Grey Whistle Test. This is unbelievable, and the crowd is so into it. So the Great Gildersleeves was, I think, 300 people. There were 2 heavy metal bands that opened, Spellbinder and Tattoo. I've not heard of either of those bands previously. And so Careering is, and Lydon, again, Lydon's performance, I mean, he is just absolutely phenomenal. And it really does feel, I mean, I talked about this in like my United States of America review, like this so is like music of the future. It's so ridiculous and powerful. And Lydon's stare, it's like they are staring into the future. He is like staring across time. And between that, what the rhythm section is doing, because they really bonded hard, and then you have the whole other universe of what Levine is doing. Unbelievable. The next song is Public Image. Public Image is a hell of a lot of fun. It's awesome. It's really great. Is that, am I getting that right? Yes, I am. Okay. So that's amazing. John spends a lot of time. There is somebody dancing off to the side of the stage on, you can kind of vaguely see arms flailing. And John spends a lot of time crouched, according to a review on fodderstomp.com, written by somebody in the front row. People were just constantly throwing things. So like at the Winterland, the last Sex Pistols show, John is constantly just picking things up. So at one point, he grabs a bunch of ketchup packets from McDonald's that were thrown up, and he's just putting stuff in his pockets, and loose change and whatever other bric-a-brac that people are tossing up at the stage. So Public Image is good. It's a little loose. So that's the other thing during this time. It's kind of funny. Public Image, the song, becomes a lot more open-ended and a lot less, it really loses the concision of the single and just sort of becomes a lot more amorphous. But it's still great. And then they go into another, which is fucking ridiculous. And this is another one where John has people from the crowd singing, spends a lot of time crouched down, but again, the sheer looseness and like total freedom of both the music, the structures of the music, and then just again the way that they're moving, the way that Levine and Lydon move. You know, John is it's very, very, very free and very, very loose, and you know, there's sort of a I don't even know, like dancing at the celebration of the harvest in the Middle Ages quality to it, and it's just absolutely fucking extraordinary. Then they do Low Life. Low Life is totally incredible. They're just totally on fire. Keith's guitar is again fucking ridiculous. Like, as I've said before, like he's incapable of playing a wrong note. Oh, the other thing I should say, Pete Doherty with the editing. The editing is great and really awesome, and he did a great job. Whole show, for fuck's sake, can we get the whole show? But the sort of contemporary stuff, that's only edited into careering. The rest of it is just straight performance edit. So just to be clear. And then they go into the last song that's on this, and that's Bad Baby. And Bad Baby is careering should be the best thing on this, but they somehow top it even with Bad Baby. The other thing that's interesting to note is the one kind of actively calling out the numbers, or the one actively starting the numbers, is Wobble. So I find that really interesting. And then it's sort of a duel between Lydon and Levine from there. Lydon is reading all the lyrics off a music stand. But Bad Baby goes into, again, whole other areas. So at one point, you hear Lydon say, "Do you want to teach them how to dance?" And this woman gets up and starts fucking dancing phenomenally fucking perfect, and like can like really, really dance. And like Lydon just sort of crouches down and is just like watching her. And it's so funny too, because she looks like she's like a model from like oh my god, like a Halston, like it's like the most 1980, like what you would think of somebody in 19, like, you know, this like black model, what you would think that they would look like in 1980, with like the loose like silk scarf and the woman in the workplace sort of blouse, like the beginning of what would become power suits or power dressing for women, like. But she is so like in control of herself, and Lydon gives her the mic. And to this day, I mean, I rarely can hear Bad Baby without hearing her at one point, and she appears to have a British accent, going, "Someone left the baby outside." Like, I always hear that. And it is incredible. And because she's dancing, and Lydon just keeps going in and out of singing, and at one point he joins her in dancing. Levine is sort of dancing whilst playing guitar, and it's so loose and free, and the crowd is so fucking into it, and it is so glorious that the song just goes on and on and on and on. And it's again, is that version of Bad Baby the single best thing they ever did? Jesus, it fucking might be. And the fact that they're that loose and that comfortable and that natural and that real and that perfect. This is the top of the mountain. Nobody else is doing this. Nobody else is thinking like this. It's again, one of my favorite things ever filmed. And again, it's interesting because, like them in Paris, like when they're in their bubble, this is what happens. It's like totally open and like endless possibilities, and anything cool can happen, right? And in this bubble on that night at the gig that they booked themselves, 300 people. It's the audience and the band really do, like, that isn't rhetoric or it isn't dogmatic punk rock rules. The audience and the band really like are one. They really are merged. And it is this one unified, celebratory, wonderful, open, free thing that the music, as long as the band is playing, this incredible, like, other social dynamic is taking place. And it also has that thing where it is beyond music, like what I've talked about before, the extrasensory aspect of Pill. All of that is happening, and it is just, it is totally, totally, totally glorious. The film was, I guess Warner Brothers was interested in it for a period of time, but then it wound up never coming out. At some point it was leaked and then heavily bootlegged. And I guess there were screenings of it that Pete Doherty oversaw. But it never was supposed to, like, be, like, officially released. But it made its way out there. I would love to see a full show, though I will say with the VHS, with the multi-gener, I don't think we're that many generations now, because the version that was on here is pretty good. What I'm going to link to on YouTube looks really good, but the color bleeds do add a sort of poetic justice when you're watching the girl dance, because like the where the arm was sort of leaves like a blue sort of color bleed that adds another really cool visual aspect to it. So it actually works in its favor. But I mean, the whole show and the whole audio of the whole show is out there. But this is like, this would be one of the greatest, like, concert films ever, if not the greatest. This is them at an imperious peak. I don't know what else to say. Like, I'll obviously be linking to it. Check it out. This is top of the mountain. On 2 days after that, they were at the Agora Ballroom in Atlanta, Georgia. There's about 35 minutes of this that is out on bootleg. It's really, really, it's a cool performance. It's sort of tighter and punchier, and more combustible. And apparently a young Michael Stipe was in the audience. And I don't know about, there were two openers. There was Vietnam, but there was also Pylon. And for any of you who are familiar with Pylon, Pylon were an outstanding band. So, and then on, let's see if I get my dates right here, on the 28th, Public Image Ltd. were at the Detroit Motor City roller rink. And this show is out on YouTube. I will be posting this. It's not a complete show. It's like 56 minutes, and there are some cuts, like Enchant. But as far as sound quality goes, this is some of the best sound quality. They do a hilarious, weird, mutated anti-cover of The Who's My Generation. But otherwise, the show is, again, absolutely phenomenal. And if you want to make the case for Martin Atkins being the true definitive drummer of Public Image Ltd, here's your fucking evidence. The drum sound is great, and holy shit, is he incredible. And also Keith, again, just does total stunner stuff on the guitar. Like, and they're, again, more improvisational. It's kind of the improvisational aspects of Boston mixed with the tightness of Atlanta. So it's that much more combustible because it's tighter and hotter, but with the improvisational aspects. So totally, I would very, very strongly recommend checking out the Detroit show as well, because it is fucking awesome. And rounding out April of 1980, the band played, again, the Agora Theater. So I don't know if there were two Agora Theaters, one in Atlanta, one in Cleveland. I just truly don't know. But they performed in Cleveland. There doesn't appear to be a recording of that show, so I can't say much about it. But that was the next show that they performed. So now we can move along to. So one thing I forgot to mention. So there are conflicting gig lists out there. I realized that I had looked at one and not the other. I looked at another one during the when I was putting together this video. There is a show that I missed from the 26th, so in between Atlanta and Detroit, the Tower Theater in Philadelphia. That show, the recording's really bad, so I barely listened to it, I'll be honest. Sounded cool, but I barely touched it. So anyway, May 1980, and it does look like both Atlanta and Cleveland were the Agora Ballroom, respectively. So May 1st, Chicago, Public Image Ltd. Is in Chicago at the Riv. They played at the fucking Riv. Think about that. Think about that, my fellow Midwesterners. You could have paid good money to go see fucking John Lydon, Keith Levine, Wobble, and Martin Atkins at the Riv. How many shows did I see at the Riv? How many ropey bands did I see who weren't fit to lick their Doc Martens? Unbelievable. So anyway, so the Riv show, it appears to be the whole show. It's a fairly short set. There's a couple cuts in it. They apparently played around 50 minutes. But this show is unbelievable. So I will be linking to the Pillhead stuff. If you're cool with a slightly ropey sound, it is fucking amazing. It is so good and so intense. It's the level of intensity and coming at you the entire time as the Sex Pistols in Dallas. It's that sort of level of, it is just overwhelming, and you almost sort of feel like giving up or giving in. And this version of Attack, let me tell you. So amazing. Pill in Chicago. Pill fucking leveled Chicago. Amazing. And if that recording were to be cleaned up, that would be, and by the way, the set list: Careering, Annalisa, Attack, Lowlife, Chant, Pop Tones, Death Disco, Memories, and Public Image. God damn. And if that were to be cleaned up, that could be a definitive, like, live album for all time. Because, I mean, that alone would be perfect. What's better, that or Detroit? You know what? Detroit is right here on YouTube. You're on YouTube. Check out Detroit. I mean, fucking unbelievable. Really, really good interview with Lydon and Levine by the great Michael Gilmore for Rolling Stone, published on May 1st. Super worth reading. I will be linking to that. And then we might as well get into this. So I noted the lyric about nature spreading itself all over, so, and home is where the heart is. So apparently in March, when Lydon and Levine had first come to America, they were contacted by Michael Wadley, who had directed the Woodstock film and was going to be branching out into feature films. He was making a film called Wolfen, and he was very interested in Pill doing the soundtrack. I think he had offered them like a quarter or a third of the soundtrack. Apparently the only thing that they actually did for the soundtrack specifically was Jaime's hymn, which winds up on Flowers of Romance, that Levine came up with to set aside for that. But this was sort of playing out in the background. Now, given the themes of the film, and there's a really, really, really good breakdown of the film and how the film relates to the original source novel, because Wadley did a fair amount of rewriting and to highlight. He was, he was old school. He was like old school OG hippie. So he really wanted to highlight the environmentalism aspect and man's encroachment upon nature. So I do wonder if, while Jaime's hymn was specifically for the movie, I do wonder if they had "Home Is Where the Heart Is" sort of tucked away because of that line in the song that directly relates to the themes. So it would make sense if Lydon went back to England, wrote that, and then like had that ready to go. It's not outrageous. I don't like to get too into speculation on this channel, but it's not outrageous to suggest that, perhaps. So that's another element that is now playing out in the background about, again, the outside world sort of encroaching, speaking of encroaching, into Public Image Limited. Now, given Pill's deep interest in film, it's not surprising that Lydon and Levine would really, really jump into this. I will touch upon one thing, another aspect of this here. So Wolfen, by the way, I might as well spoil it here, winds up not having any Pill, and Wadley loses final cut. The film, though, in and of itself, is pretty amazing. Albert Finney stars in it. He's incredible. If you like that era of horror film and sort of gore, it's sort of right up there. It's a very, very strong film. I don't know that I would go and say, oh, it's a masterpiece, but it's a very, very strong film. And Michael Wadley did some really great stuff. But again, apparently he had something like kind of a la Michael Cimino right around the same time. He apparently turned in like a 4-hour cut. And Levine and Lydon claimed that the studio really mangled the edit and took out what would have been all of the best parts of the film. So I can't really speak to that, but like I said, there's a very, very good breakdown of Wolfen that I will include. It's well worth watching. It's a fascinating story, and Wadley going up against the system and getting kind of steamrolled, is another. It's an interesting parallel story, and how that going up against the man and how that spans the generations and how interesting all of that is. But one of the things towards the end of the year, when it looked like it was a real possibility, Levine does another interview. We'll get into that later, but he talks about, is it Levine's first solo interview, and Keith talks about there are 32 levels of sound, or 32 levels of understanding Pill's music on, and he's really, really into this. And he claims that when he spoke with Wadley keyed in on the 32 layers of sound and what is actually happening to you psychologically, spiritually, physiologically as you are taking in their music. Apparently, Keith, when James Blood Ulmer opened at the Palladium for Pill, there was a similar conversation that took place there as well. So I always found that fascinating, and that Keith and Michael Wadley really saw eye to eye, and that Wadley, I guess, was very into Metal Box and really had keyed into the deeper levels. So it is interesting that one of the real 60s guys got what Public Image Limited was doing and didn't see it as some sort of threat or negation, kind of along the lines of Neil Young. Kind of interesting to note. On May 4th, Public Image Limited played the Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles. The show had originally been scheduled for 2 weeks before, but the venue moved a couple times. Apparently this was a SOP. Where they wound up playing was another roller rink where they also had boxing matches, and wasn't really a music venue. So that was sort of a SOP from the booking agents to accommodate Pill's request to play unusual venues. This whole show, and it is a longer show, it's almost as long as the Boston show, is pretty amazing. There's a antagonistic aspect of the crowd. Lydon gets combative and confrontational with the crowd as only he can in it. But it is outstanding musically. The person so this show is out there on YouTube. The person that did the tape transfer, I guess they had it like professionally transferred. It's fucking fantastic sounding. So if you want like a good, long, full show, you bet your ass I'll be linking to this. It's fucking amazing. I love the tight, like, white knuckle thing of the Chicago show, but this is expansive and fucking incredible. And kind of like Detroit, they extend some of the songs, like Death Disco, which does cut out, but absolutely incredible. And the one thing I forgot to mention about Gildersleeves with that amazing version of Bad Baby, Keith and this Bad Baby in L.A., Jesus, it is now a performance piece to rival careering. What Keith is doing on the synths, and he is going into fucking outer space. Like, he's now becoming like as adventurous and as wildly uninhibited as he is on the guitar. Like the synths, and he's like constantly discovering new places to go on the synths. So the LA version of Bad Baby, it's out on YouTube. You're already on YouTube. Go check that shit out. Fucking incredible show. I absolutely love it. So again, I kind of can't recommend it enough. Funny side note, there were 3 opening acts. One was the Kipper Kids, which was like some performance art thing, which I'm not very familiar with. There was a traditional Mexican mariachi band, members of whom eventually apparently went on later in life to form Los Lobos, so that's cool. But then the third opening act, the Plugs, the very, very, very underrated The Plugs, who were a great band, and who Bob Dylan wound up using as a backing band on his epical, amazing 1984 David Letterman performance, that great version of Joker Man. And what's the other song they did? I don't remember now, but it's fantastic. It's one of my favorite Dylan performances. So, on May the 8th, Jaw Wobble's The Legend Lives On, Jaw Wobble in Betrayal album comes out, and it is noted by some that there is a distinct similarity to some Public Image Ltd recordings. Mystery, intrigue, foreshadowing. So we'll get to that in a little bit. The very next day, Martin Atkins does his own phone interview with KTIM San Francisco, where he basically slacks off Public Image Ltd and says that all of the "we're not a band, we're a corporation" stuff is completely nonsensical, and that they are unprofessional and don't really achieve much of anything. That's interesting. And then on May 10th, the band plays. So they had a show in Oakland that was canceled. They had a show in Berkeley that was moved, and it winds up in San Francisco at the South of Market Cultural Center. Okay, so it's interesting that kind of in the same way the Nirvana, like, did you ever notice, and why did nobody ever seem to notice, that every tour that Kurt did behind every album ended with him, roughly speaking, quitting the band? That they never really finished their touring, or if they did, they barely finished it, and that Kurt, like, either made threats or wanted to quit the band or walk. Nobody ever seemed to notice that maybe Kurt would have been better off. Well, heroin's not too good for you, but if Kurt maybe had just been more of a Brian Wilson and just kind of stayed home, that maybe he wasn't really built for touring, and that maybe his life would have been a little bit better if he could just be a creative musician at home and not toured, or not toured as much. Things might have been better. So, similarly, John Lydon brought a great, genius, pioneering band to America, and both times they made it one tour, and not even very long slogs, and both times it crapped out in San Francisco. Both times it just went, like, it just hit the wall in San Francisco both times. What a weird what a weird parallel. So they play in San Francisco. Apparently the promoters were CD Presents. The band, like the Velvet Underground before them, tangled with Bill Graham. Like, it's, by this point, like, it's just kind of a mess. The show itself is very good. So in LA they played Home Is Where the Heart Is. They also did Religion. They did a great version of Religion in LA. This show is almost as long. It's a really, really good show. It maybe doesn't fully rise to the heights of LA. I think Lydon liked it better. I don't know. Maybe it's just that the sound quality of the LA show is that much better, and I was able to fully appreciate it more. I don't know. But the last song they played together was Memories. So, but it's a hell of a show, and the opening instrumental version of Fodder Stomp, the sort of half-mix, mega-mix version of Fodder Stomp is fantastic. So, at any rate. And that's the tour. So that was May 10th of 1980 was the last time that they all played together. Never to do it again. So, on May 17th, but the tour sort of wasn't completely done yet because Public Image Ltd. Had a wonderful promotional opportunity before them to go on, yes, American Bandstand, the hallowed broadcast institution here. And apparently Public Image Ltd. Were wholly ignorant of the significance of going on American Bandstand. So, I mean, I would have been, I was merely a child at this point. But, I mean, American Bandstand was something I was aware of by the time I was like 4 or 5. I mean, it was an omnipresent American institution. So, and Dick Clark was an omnipresent force in American broadcast and had been since the 50s. My dad was a fan. I mean, Dick Clark was just a fact of life, and it seemed like he truly would just be there forever. So, but apparently Warner Brothers had given, this is according to the Martin Atkins, Eric Blair interview. I'll be linking to that. It's fucking fantastic. So apparently they had, Warner Brothers had edited the songs for broadcast and had given the band a cassette with a boombox to play in their dressing rooms so they could learn the edited version, so they could mime to it accurately. Well, the band never bothered playing the tape, apparently. So they get out there. By this point, John Lydon, as I think I've talked about this before, has extremely complex sinuses. Another weird thing I relate to, I've had I almost died of pneumonia when I was 16, and ever since then, I have had extremely complex sinuses. So the first 16 years of my life, I breathed normally, and ever since then, there are problems, and I always have Kleenex on me at all times. I don't go anywhere without Kleenex or paper towel of some sort. So anyway, and just in case, I had somebody give me the riot act once that wasn't environmentally friendly and that I should have a cloth handkerchief. And to which my response was, that would be the most disgusting cloth handkerchief ever after a couple hours. So no. And potentially that could be bad for my health, re-ingesting things one should not. So no, I keep it to paper. So anyway, you don't need to know that shit, do you? So anyway, so Dick Clark was apparently a little wary of having Public Image Ltd. on. So John Lydon had, again, very bad flu, as he does. So, as he put it, he has had the flu for 22 years, allergic to air conditioning, airplanes, and he has extremely bad hay fever, extremely bad sinuses. The air conditioning thing, Lydon has mentioned again and again and again and again. He mentioned it, I want to say, in both books. That just is a fact of his life. So I will just say when in the broadcast he pulls out the nasal spray thing. So when I saw him in 2010, that was he had an array of nasal spray things that he kept. So yeah, that's a lifelong problem. So, and one I kind of relate to, funnily enough. So Apparently, Dick Clark was wary of having Lydon on the show and queried to his producers, "What can I expect from this asshole?" So Dick Clark, being Dick Clark, goes to meet them backstage, and he encounters a sleeping jaw Wobble. He wakes him up to introduce himself, and Wobble doesn't know this guy from Adam, and Wobble's, he's like, "Who are you?" He doesn't recognize Wobble. Wobble doesn't really know who he is. And he's like, "I'm Wobble, Jaw Wobble." And Dick Clark introduces himself. And he's like, "Great, now fuck off." So things didn't get off to a great start. That being said, Dick Clark, holding up a copy of second edition, declares before the performance that a memorable moment in rock and roll, something special and interesting. So the song starts, the edited version of Pop Tones begins, and the band is sort of set up very standard, except there's no Lydon. Lydon appears. Lydon didn't know where to come in the edited version. He was sick, but John Lydon is wearing a white suit. It is another glorious, glorious sartorial decision. It appears to be like a Hawaiian shirt underneath it. So even better, like a blue and orange sort of Hawaiian shirt. So again, I first saw this on these. It was broadcast once on a VH1 retrospective best of the 80s thing. So I did see it once on television. Given the color bleeds and the generational quality, and both, there's a couple versions of it on YouTube. One tries to fix it, but compresses it in a weird way. You can't fully clearly see exactly what the pattern of the shirt is, but if only I had known, I would have taped it off VHS all those many years ago. But anyway, Pop Tone starts, and John Lydon is basically trying to avoid the cameras because he can't lip sync effectively. So he makes a couple efforts here and there where he holds the mic up to his mouth, he sort of tries, but doesn't really know what to do, And so, yeah, he sort of is trying to hide behind the crowd. He's turns his back to the cameras. He goes out to sort of be a front man, puts his back to the cameras a couple times. And then he just runs into the crowd and pulls a girl out with him. A lone blonde girl, right? And then he grabs, there's people dressed up as baseball players for some reason. He grabs the baseball players, and he just starts grabbing people out onto the dance floor area, sort of surrounding the band. And he just keeps doing it. And eventually he ascends the sort of little dance tower thing and is jumping around up there. And it's amazing. He is just pulling all these people out. It is glorious. And there is this aspect of, it seems anarchic. It seems like, it's punk rock, it's dark, or it's negative. But it isn't. It's joyous. It's celebratory. It's erasing the barrier. It's what they talk about. It's erasing the barrier between the band and the audience. It's, and Martin Atkins, I know it sort of drove him crazy that people would assign intention to everything they did / Lydon did, because they were so in love with the idea of John, or so in love with the idea of the Pistols. And I get that. And from his perspective, that makes all the sense in the world. But from my perspective / fans, right? We see this, and we're not in the dressing room with them beforehand. So yes, they are being completely naturalistic, but it's also a situation of, we sort of have no choice but to to interpret it, right? And because it's so interesting and unique, at some point you are going to interpret it, especially when it fits in with all of these other things that are happening, right? And the way the records come out, and the way things are presented aesthetically. So, so yes, that may not have been there, but, and Atkins is very pointedly funny about it, where he said if John had spilled a Pepsi, someone would have reviewed it by saying, the Pepsi is like the stain, like he made a stain, and it's the deconstruction of the, like, and I get that, and I totally get that, and it's funny, and it's true, but it ultimately is resulting in art that is there for interpretation, and I don't think it's completely foolhardy, especially with all of the other events, performances, records, etc., to see an arc that, especially over time, forms an aesthetic. So there is absolute truth to what Martin Atkins is saying, but I do think there is a little bit more to it than that. And even if it was not a planned out strategic thing or a planned out performance art thing, in the moment it becomes that. So whether you have music pre-written or you are improvising music, you're still making music. Right? It still results in music. So this still results in some sort of performance or performance art, or performing art, maybe is a better way of putting it, right? So Lydon dancing around is on the dance tower thing is one of my favorite things of all time. And I feel like there's this sort of wonderful moment with the audience where they realize he's not going to smash something. Like, he's not there to destroy anything. He's not going to fucking spit on them. He's not going to, like, right? He's not going to vomit on it. Like, all the sort of nonsense you hear about punk rock or whatever. That it's, for lack of a better word, inclusive, that everybody's in. Everybody's in the party. You don't have to look punk rock. You don't have to be dancing a certain way. Everybody's in. Everybody's in. Right? All the points of view are there, all the attitudes are there, all the styles addressed, so even the goofy people in baseball uniforms for some fucking reason, all of that's there. The black girl with the early George Clinton-esque 80s, where it's like red, so it almost like looks like a mohawk at a distance. That girl, the guy with the shades doing the robot dances, like everybody's, the disco dancers, the new wave kids, everybody's in the mix. Everybody's in the mix. And, you know, this is a hot button word these days, but diversity, right? It's actually diverse. It's true diversity. Diversity means, really, what it should mean is you go to the Indian place, you go to the Mexican place, you go to the Italian place, right? And you go to the Ethiopian place. You appreciate it. You appreciate each aspect. You try to find something to like. You see what's cool about it. You see what's interesting about it, right? It's not the Indian place, the Greek place, the Mexican place, the Italian place, all have to serve the same McDonald's hamburger. That's the opposite of what it should be about. And I think that this is humanistic in the best possible way. It's the opposite of nihilistic. It's everybody in. It's beautiful. It makes me smile every time I've ever seen it. It's so fucking joyous. And John is just such a usual Pied Piper. And there's also an aspect of, you know, I think as like, with like, you know, when I saw like the rise of Pitchfork, there really was like a Revenge of the Nerds aspect of it, that they were going to get revenge on people, and they were going to be really nasty and snarky about people. And part of what I love about Lydon is this was the weird kid. This was the guy who wasn't allowed to become a teacher. This was the perpetual outcast. And he gets his time on American fucking Bandstand. And what does he do? He doesn't say fuck you, or he doesn't, like, no, he does the opposite. He brings everybody in, and he does it on instinct because he's embarrassed about not knowing the words. But that's where his instincts leads him. That's incredible. I fucking love that. Like, fucking right on. 24 years old to be that sort of, I don't know, emotionally ahead of the curve, right? I wouldn't have been like that at 24. I had a whole lot of fuck you in me, and I never would have thought to do something that cool. I will be honest. And then, you know, Dick Clark comes out. He asks Keith who he is. Wobble, of course, introduces himself as the Jaw Wobble. Wobble sort of breaking out on his own foreshadowing. And then Martin Atkins, and then he asks John, like, are you doing okay, Johnny? And tries to talk to Lydon. Lydon's way off mic. And so it's Wobble who suggests everybody come out and dance. So I think Lydon sort of waves for for everybody to come out. But Wobble's the one who actually says everybody out. And what's cool is I feel like in that moment, Dick Clark gets it. Dick Clark, of all people, gets that, it kind of in a funny way, though they're not all that similar, but kind of in a similar way that Dick Clark eventually got Kiss, that he was like afraid of them when he first heard about them and that it was like some demonic thing. And then he sort of realized that it was like going to see a horror movie and that it was like fun and that it wasn't like gonna destroy the youth of America or something. And so it's weird because sort of in that moment, Dick Clark laughs. He's like, everybody out. And like, he sort of realizes like, oh, they're not going to smash the cameras. They're not going to piss on something. They're not like fucking animals that are going to destroy things. This is good television. I think he understood this is great television. This is fun. And so they go into careering, which on this tour has been the ultimate imposing intensity, the ultimate performance piece, the ultimate articulation of fear of the future and facing it. And it's just so fucking white knuckle. Somehow, in this moment, in this context, careering becomes a fucking dance party. It becomes a dance party for everyone watching and for everyone participating. It is absolutely glorious. John is just being silly. He's going around posing with people. He at one point goes, "Is my hair all right?" You can see he has the nasal stick thing. And then at some point, and this is also like, as great as John is and as cool as that is, what is also cool is all of a sudden you hear this weird drumming thing. That's because Atkins gets off the drums and Wobble gets on him and is playing live drums. Atkins is just goofing off, miming with bass. Levine puts his guitar on somebody, and Levine and Lydon very charmingly dance together. It's beautiful. And Lydon and the guy doing the robot dances, Lydon goes out and checks out the buttons on, and then he's like, it's so glorious and beautiful. And I'm just going to say, it's the best fucking thing that was ever broadcast on American television. It is the high point. It was Pill somehow dealing with the encroaching world, somehow dealing with the corporate pressure and the entertainment industry machines, and in the moment, in a glorious moment of improvisation, inverting all of that, and not in a fuck you way, but in a everybody in the pool kind of way. It's amazing. It's positive negativism. It's the best ever application of positive negativism, and it's incredible. It's what do you like? Milkshakes, like. And that's what the performance is. It's fucking milkshakes. It's glorious. I love it. It's my favorite thing that I've ever seen on television. And it's the opposite of check it out. It's like when they're not being greeted with surliness, it's this beautiful moment, and there's this sort of, I don't know, trust that is established. It's glorious. And the machinery, the corporate world bends to them. In this moment, they did it. They figured it out. They somehow, for this one brief moment, split the atom. Consequently, years later, Dick Clark, they were named the eighth best ever guest on American Bandstand. And to bring things down a little bit, at the end of May of 1980, Wobble does an interview with Impulse magazine, which did Impulse eventually become the official magazine of Tower Records? I want to say that they did, but I don't know if they were at this point, but I think that was the case. That's going back 30 some years, but anyway. But Wobble does an interview with the great Chris Needs, one of the great punk rock journalists in England. And I think I've mentioned him in previous videos somewhere along the line. But it's a pretty heartbreaking interview because he really, he's angry about Lydon and Levine, and really, kind of like Martin Atkins, kind of rips Lydon. And I was pretty surprised, and pretty surprised that he was that sort of blatant, and sort of goes one step past Atkins on that. And it's surprising that he's that overt in his criticism of Lydon. Levine doesn't get it as bad. But also at the same time, what's heartbreaking about it is, and I know that like Lydon and some people don't really give Wobble the benefit of the doubt because of how things ended up. But, Wobble talks about like wanting to put Pill royalties into building a studio, making more backing tracks. He really wanted them to do proper touring because he felt that the band should be playing. I think he really loved the music. And I feel like there's no reason to believe that those moments of that interview aren't earnest. And that, Keith had his problems, as we've talked about, and we'll talk about again. And it is kind of heartbreaking that Wobble, there were all these things that Wobble wanted to do with Pill. And that was soon to come to a, very, very, very fast ending. So that's sort of like the final statement from Wobble on the Pill front, and it's sad. And on May 24th, Lydon had done an interview with Sylvie Simmons in Sounds. I'll be linking to that. It's a really, really good interview. But there is one point that I think is interesting to point out. She says, "Do you care about people in mass? In the Pistols, you seem to care in an odd sort of way." To which John replies, and I think this is a very earnest answer, I dare say, "Some days I do, and other days, no." Just so you know, this is the Rich of a couple days later, and the June 1980 footage. I did not learn until I was very deep into editing this that the June 1980 segment that I had filmed for this had gotten corrupted. So, so I'm refilming this. So, unfortunately, the events of June 1980 are going to get a little bit of the short shrift. My apologies. It's as the video is very, very long, and that was with the understanding that June was already a part of that. So, at any rate. So, at the beginning of June 1980, or not in the beginning, June 12th, it is announced that Martin Atkins is in fact not in Public Image Ltd. Anymore, and this is when the suggestion that Wobble might be out as well when those things start to swirl. And on June 27th, and this is one of the great Public Image Ltd. Events. I'm going to try and do this justice here. I did it justice when I filmed this a couple days ago, but here we are. So, and I thought I had kind of done it the way it needed to be done. So, John Lydon and Keith Levine are on the Tomorrow Show with Tom Snyder. So I would have first seen that here, and the whole episode is now out on YouTube. I'm going to be linking to that because I actually think it's really interesting to see Snyder's intro and then his very sort of bewildered, good-natured humor of the outro. The first guest is the guy who produced Grease. So that. In the intro, Tom Snyder mostly basically just talks about the Sex Pistols and the current Where Are They Now? So I think that that's sort of where the problems begin. And I think that, understandably, John saw this as another wind-up a la Check It Out, and another setup situation, and a cheapskate comedy interrogation act. And but I think that that's the fundamental misunderstanding. Tom Snyder was very kind of up the middle and not particularly radical or wild, but Tom Snyder wasn't dumb, and Tom Snyder wasn't trying to make them look ridiculous. This wasn't a Bill Grundy, and it wasn't a Check It Out for America. It really, I don't think he had that in his mind at all. So, but Tom Snyder, I mean, I like Tom Snyder. I liked his '90s show when I was a teenager. I was always a fan of Tom Snyder. So, I think that it's easy to clown on him in this scenario. It's very easy to take Public Image Ltd's side, but it's also not unreasonable that for a Tom Snyder, for a mainstream NBC chat show appearance, that yeah, it probably would be focused around the Sex Pistols because America hadn't really seen them. Like, I don't think it's that outrageous. But from John and Keith's perspective, I do get it, and it leads to, and I'm assuming you've already seen it. I don't want to totally. I didn't recap it a few days ago either. Other than I think part of the big issue are the divergent temperaments of John and Keith, and I think Snyder trying to work that out because Keith's way of answering things, and other people who have interviewed him have noted this over the years, that Keith tends to be 4 or 5 things ahead of what he's actually saying. Like he's sort of working his way somewhere, and that just isn't fit for broadcast television because Keith kind of wanders around and dodges and feints and not trying to be confrontational, not trying to be performance art. And then you just have John being confrontational, but I think also it being a chat show, John trying to use humor, and a lot of that and sort of being a little cheeky. And I think that gets kind of lost on Tom Snyder because he's just like this sort of middle of the road American guy who truly cannot understand these two men. And so I don't know that I think it's more of just a misunderstanding than it is. The only thing I know of Bill Grundy is when the Sex Pistols were on. And Bill Grundy, from what I saw, really was a gross old drunk who's, hitting on Susie Sue and is gross. And Tom Snyder wasn't like that. He wasn't gross and he wasn't dumb, He's just bewildered, I think, and then annoyed, right? So, but, there is a lot of endlessly quotable hilarity on it anyway. And when we get to positive negativism, Keith sort of distills positive negativism, and I went off on a whole long thing about this. Distills it to its essence because, like the press conference in San Francisco, Tom Snyder asks, "What do you like?" And Keith initially says, "I only know what I don't like," and or he doesn't initially say, I'm sorry. He takes a long time. He can't think of anything he likes, and then eventually comes out with, "I only know what I don't like," which is like the ultimate positive negativist statement, where Tom Snyder sees that as dismissive and I think maybe condescending. Keith is... The thing about positive negativism, to me, is, well, that's actually a really healthy approach to look at things. You remove what you don't like, and you have everything else available to you. That's pretty beautiful, if you're just talking music, I wouldn't have known that I would have liked Turkish classical music. I wouldn't have known that I would have liked Slayer, on and on and on, until I went and checked it out. And if you remove the things you don't like, if you can positively identify the things that you don't like, well, that leaves everything else. But I don't think Tom Snyder was going to make that jump live on the air. And then one of the other truly great moments is a few minutes later, Lydon says that he enjoyed seeing Carter's plane not being able to land and then him falling down the stairs. And Keith, and nobody catches it, but Keith goes, "Oh, something John likes," which is hysterical. John is very funny. I mean, it is legendary television. It is basically as good as the American Bandstand performance. It is 2 halves of, they were able to make the medium bend to their will on American Bandstand, and this is what happens when it comes up against resistance. This is what happens when they aren't able to bring the world into their bubble, and the world, and they just clash against the outside world. The other interesting thing to note, and I've always been fascinated by this is when they kind of sort of note that they might be doing the Wolfen soundtrack with Michael Wadley, and John is listing the things that they are interested in, and he says, and film soundtracks, and both him and Keith turn their heads and look at the camera in perfect sync with each other. And that, like, as if it was a pre-planned move, but it couldn't have been. And again, the instincts are just fascinating and perfect. A beautiful epilogue to all of this is in 1997. John and Tom Snyder, though still a little bit prickly with each other, had a sort of make-up interview where they're a lot more jolly and a lot more understanding of each other. And it's funny and convivial and lovely, because I think John saw that Tom Snyder was in fact not the enemy. And Tom Snyder saw that John Lydon wasn't going to ruin everything, smash everything up. So the 1997 interview I absolutely love too, but for entirely different reasons. So it caused great controversy, etc., etc. It is, like I said, it is as remarkable as the Bandstand performance. And a couple days ago, I went on at greater length about it, but I'm sure you've already seen it. I'll be linking to the entire broadcast. I really think it's worth it. So there you go. Moving right along. So Fodder Stomp dates this. There's a little bit of conflict around what the actual timeline of this is, but it's thought to be after they had gotten back after the tour, and maybe before they flew out to Tom Snyder, or maybe just in the days after. But Lydon and Levine at the Manor, but also at Berry Street Studios, but then they went to the Manor, recorded Laundrette with journalist Vivian Goldman. Vivian Goldman had interviewed Lydon extensively at this point, and is still out there. She's still a raconteur, and basically it's pretty cool because it's basically a post-punk supergroup. You've got Vicky from the Raincoats, Robert Wyatt, Adrian Sherwood, Steve Beresford. And Laundrette is kind of a ridiculous single, and but it's I love it. And so it's Keith on guitar and bass, and also participating is Steve New, also known as Shoes. So you'll remember from my Iggy Pop video that Steve New played on Soldier. He had been in the Rich Kids with Glenn Matlock. So like Ken Lockey before him, Keith Levine desperately wanted Shoes to be in Public Image Ltd. I think probably at least partially from the pedigree of being in the Rich Kids, John was dead set against that idea. However, it is figured that at these sessions... Oh, and that's the other thing, by the way. The B-side of Laundrette. So Laundrette is almost like a take on a 1940s song. It's almost like sort of slightly campy musical theater. It's like post-punk musical theater. It's a interesting piece of writing. I think her voice is perfectly fine, but the musical backing is fantastic, because you've got Victoria from the Raincoats. That's a hell of a group to have behind you. The B-side is called Private Armies. Private Armies is fascinating. Private Armies is basically like a proto Riot Girl lyric, and really, really interestingly written, a really interesting metaphor, and it's very dubby and Public Image Ltd-y, and Keith did a hell of a job on that. So Private Armies, I'll link to those songs, but Private Armies is really the one to check out, because that's far more in Vivian Goldman's sort of wheelhouse as a performer, and again, just really, really, really interesting, and a kind of more overtly feminist than maybe even the Slits and the Raincoats and Lilliput and X-Ray Specs, though perhaps maybe not as overt as some of the stuff by the Au Pairs, maybe, but it's in league with that stuff. Very few groups are as good as the Slits, the Raincoats, Lilliput. That's a hell of a, especially the Raincoats, who I've talked about before, who I fucking love. Someday, believe me, there will be a Raincoats video or videos I have to figure out how I really want to do that, you know. But so I mean, the music is untouchable, and it's a great, cool post-punk, dubby, strange, avant-garde oddity, and really really cool, and I genuinely like it. And then, but it is figured that at the same sessions, Public Image Limited, with a one-time only three-person lineup of Steve New, Keith Levene, and John Lydon, recorded the song Pied Piper, which, I will trot it out yet again. This is my busted-up old copy of Plastic Box. So I first heard it on here on disc 2. This is my reissued copy of Plastic Box, and it is on Songs from the Heart as well. So Pied Piper is a minute 53. It winds up coming out a couple months later on a compilation called Machines, but it is a really... apparently, and I forget where I read this. I read this somewhere at some point. I didn't find it again in my reading for this video, but that the backing track was basically something that Levene and Shoes assembled that was like 10 minutes long. It was just this big, endless, I guess, series of loops and stuff. I'm not sure what Lydon's level of participation was. The actual track, the actual song as we hear it, it's the lone studio recording issued from Public Image Limited in 1980. And it's a minute 53, so they severely chopped it down. But this is the most proto Flowers of Romance song. It is absolute. I love it. Because it is that weird. I mean, Keith's frame of reference again would probably be dub. I think of it as the next sort of development of psychedelia, the next development of the Berlin trilogy. It's absolutely magnificent, of truly using the studio as the instrument. I love it. This spiraling, dense, clanging, like you know, a bag of 10,000 coins clanging incessantly, and just all these sounds and drones spiraling around. It's an amazing little piece of music. And Lydon's lyrics, I mean, this kind of begins the lyrical style that he will use for the next couple of years, really. The very, very, very clipped, brief little abstract phrases, and this lyric is highly, highly repetitive and just goes round and round as he sings frantically and manically. It is an amazing, amazing little performance out there, and just this tiny little gem of what they could do when they were again kind of in their little bubble and just being creative and in Lydon's own words, just left to just get on with it. So yeah, that's the lone song they put out that year. But you know, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's a major piece, but it's a gem, and it's very much of a piece with, you know, if Levene already had Jaime's Hymn, it is very much of a piece with Jaime's Hymn, and very much down that road. So really, really, really cool, and I absolutely love it. So that's June of 1980 on this refilming. On July 2nd, Jimmy Lydon's band, the 4B2s, released their single Frustration that John had produced a few months before. And on July 5th is when Keith Levene does the NME, gets his NME cover. And it's his first solo interview. He appears, you know, as I said before, he appears to sort of go in and out of it a little bit, but it winds up being a really, really amazing, fascinating interview, which I will absolutely be linking. The other thing that's interesting are the very striking photos for it taken by Anton Corbin, who worked with Joy Division, later went on to do a lot of music videos and films, and kind of became the main visual person. What Peter Saville was to New Order is what he wound up becoming to Depeche Mode, certainly in their music videos. So I'll maybe throw those up, Rich, if you want to do that. But they really are striking images of Keith. And part of what's interesting is he confirms that they will absolutely not be playing live anymore. Wobble was still a member. However, he slags Wobble relentlessly, and it is pretty nasty. The other thing that's interesting is this is the interview where he really gets into the 32 layers of pill, and is reveals an obsession with Brian Eno and ambient music, and that pill ultimately is sort of, he doesn't say ambient music, but music, and not even background music, but that it's kind of environmental music, and the interviewer pushes back on that, and it's interesting because Keith sort of will not be swayed, and in fact, kind of at one point drops the idea that what he would really like to do for a Pill album, kind of along the lines of Brian Eno, is make a Pill album that would serve as music for wimpy bars, which, if you're, as an Anglophile, I know a little bit about what wimpy bars are, but that is pretty amazing. But it's one of those things, like with Intention, if Pill had put out a fucking album called Music for Wimpy Bars, there's absolutely no way in the world that would have been taken as anything other than a parody and a riposte and a piss take of Eno and ambient music and artistic pretensions. Like, it's interesting how that works. But he appeared to be quite earnest about this idea. A couple other little things from that interview. Pill used, as a rehearsal studio, Rollerball Rehearsal Studios on Tooley Street in London. He talks a lot about Wolfen and talks about meeting with Michael Wadley, which sadly they didn't get. The other thing that's interesting to note, Larry White, who winds up becoming Pill's manager in the spring of '83, is mentioned and is kind of in and around at this time. So yeah. Now, also in July of 1980, not long after the NME, Wobble actually leaves. Wobble tells John that he's leaving. Now, all of this is back to the backing track fiasco. And I don't, they talk about that a lot in the Public Image's Rotten documentary. I don't particularly want to rehash that, other than to say the backing tracks that they had done back in January, Wobble and Martin Atkins, he does a dub remix of another called Not Another, and then uses The Suit as part of his bizarre cubist, distended, strange reinterpretation of Fats Domino's Blueberry Hill. And apparently he actually pulled the master tapes. Lydon and Levine were in the studio. They noted that the tapes were missing. I'm not sure what they would have been getting used for. Maybe putting together the version of second edition is the only thing I can think of, because Metal Box was already out. I don't know. And apparently Wobble thought he could sneak the tapes back in before they found out. So I think that was the crux of the disagreement. Levine really took offense to the idea that Wobble was just putting out straight up solo albums, and thought that anything he should be doing should come under, that he could do whatever he wanted, but that should come under the umbrella of Public Image Ltd, and not just be a solo release. They also took exception to the name of Betrayal of the album. And given that he had started to kind of really self-promote, they took that as a betrayal of the concept of Public Image. Wobble, for his part, seems to have thought that John and Keith wouldn't have a problem with it and would just see the album as sort of a silly side project, kind of like Dreadlock, Don't Deal, and Wedlock. But they really were burned about it. Making things worse, and Wobble has told this story himself, making things worse is apparently he made off with the cash from the U.S. tour that he took from a shoebox in Gunter Grove, and went back to America and rented a car and went on a holiday. So went on a little vacation there. So apparently that was the real end of it. Levine and Wobble really never got on anyway, and then with Atkins gone. It's sad. They lost a lot with Wobble, and by, June or July of '81, Wobble was working with Holger and Jackie Liebzit. I'm not sure how to. I can never pronounce their names of the great German krautrock group Can, one of the greatest groups that's ever lived. I will eventually, next year, when I do 82 and 83, I guess I'm just doing these 2 a year, God willing, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the music that Wobble recorded with the members of Can and funnily enough, The Edge. So, because I'm actually going to tie some of that into the commercial zone. The final sort of thing I will say about that Wobble album is some of it is really interesting, some of it's really cool, but I have to say, in the end, I find, especially that version of Blueberry Hill, I find inexplicable. And I'm not even really sure what I think about it. And it certainly wasn't worth breaking up the band, or him leaving the band over. I really wish that they could have ironed that out. They lost a lot with Wobble in the long term. In the short term, they were able to sustain it on the incredible talents of Keith Levene and John Lydon. But also, the members weren't the member member hemorrhage wasn't done just quite yet, because that month they also lost Dave Crow. Dave Crow apparently didn't seem to like the direction that the group was going in, but also Levene claims that he was more or less asked to leave because he was too passive and didn't take any sort of leadership role and didn't bring anything new into Pill. So that was July. Pretty devastating. August 11th is when it's finally announced that Wobble is actually gone. And yeah, sad stuff. September 1980. I don't know for certain that it is September, but for lack of a better way of putting it, we will say it is. Public Image Ltd. went into the Townhouse to mix Home Is Where the Heart Is. Home Is Where the Heart Is had actually been recorded prior to leaving for the U.S. tour, and Lydon did not like the original engineer and locked him out of the room, and young, relatively inexperienced engineer Nick Launay got an instant promotion. Nick Launay's name will be coming up a lot in the next video when I talk about the Flowers of Romance proper, and I'm not going to get too deep into that. I'm mostly going to focus on that in the next video, in the making of the album. But it is interesting because the credits of Home Is Where the Heart Is have always been really ambiguous. There was an initial publishing mistake that credited Lydon, Levene, Wobble, and Jim Walker, so that was incorrect. Martin Atkins, in fact, plays on it. And there's always the sort of thing, oh, it was a metal box outtake. It doesn't actually really appear that it was. And also on the final record in the mix, apparently that is Keith played the bass over Wobble, and then it's a tape loop. So I'm not even sure if Wobble's actually on this, or is Wobble on this in the same way that Sid Vicious is on, is it Bodies? I forget which song Sid supposedly is subsonically on, but so they could say that Sid was on the album, but Sid, or was it Submission? I forget now. It's been a while since I've watched the making of Nevermind the Bollocks, but so I guess it's, I don't, and I still have read different things that they took Wobble's original bass line and then just made a loop out of it, but it appears that Keith actually redubbed Wobble's bass line and then made a loop out of that. So I don't know, it's odd, but at any rate, that is that. On October the 2nd, John Lydon flies to Ireland to hang out with the 4B2s as they are going to be playing shows in Dublin and Cork. On October the 3rd, John Lydon gets into a fracas in a pub and at the Horse and Tram in Eden Quay, Dublin. Lydon said, "I was smashed in the back of the head. I never had been in any sort of a fray like that. I've been beaten up by National Front supporters, but never been in anything like that." It turns out that the person who started the fight was an off-duty policeman, so that means, of course, that Lydon gets arrested, right? And the landlord claims that Lydon had assaulted him after being refused service. Lydon counters this by stating he was punched in the back of the head while leaving the pub. On August the 4th, so he is arrested, taken to jail, freed, or he is initially released, goes to the 4B2 show at Trinity College of Dublin, and later that night is re-arrested and taken to jail. Great. On October the 4th, Lydon appears in district court and is charged with common assault and is refused bail and taken to Mountjoy Prison. There is footage, very daunting Super 8 footage of Mountjoy Prison in the Public Image Ltd documentary, and it's one of those prisons that you hear about as being particularly bad. So on October the 6th, 1980, happy third birthday, Rich, John Lydon is found guilty of common assault and sentenced to 3 months in Mountjoy Prison. However, he is released on £250 bail and pending an appeal. So, also in October of 1980 is when the Machines compilation comes out. So that's the compilation that has Pied Piper, and so yeah, that's the lone studio recording to come out that year. While out on bail, Pill goes into the Manor with engineer Mick Glossop and starts work on the Flowers of Romance. It appears that by this point, the Wolfen soundtrack opportunity has come and gone, and that they do kind of basically start with Jaime's hymn. The whole album is recorded in about 10 days. We'll be getting way deep into that in the next video. There's a set of sessions that don't really work that they try doing, and then they call in Martin Atkins, and that's when the ball really gets rolling. On November the 1st, Public Image Ltd. Keep working on the Flowers of Romance. Martin Atkins is firmly installed at this point, and that's going to be the subject of the next video. On November the 14th, Paris au Printemps is finally released, and there is a really interesting interview with The Face right around this time that paints quite the picture of the Flowers of Romance recording sessions. John is constantly playing a bootleg early VHS copy of Clockwork Orange that he's particularly obsessed with. The band is also recording opposite the Jam, and in the original notes for Plastic Box, making fun of the Jam, he says they were busy trying to recreate 1966 yet again, which is pretty funny. And also at this point, the money is pretty bad. Wobble making off with the U.S. tour money was really ill-timed. And Lydon actually mentions that the things are so bad that he writes a check he knows is going to bounce to pay the electric bill at Gunter Grove. The other thing to note is, in addition to constantly being raided, the punks, and we're now sort of into the era of kind of more like the exploited sort of era punks, or what was I've seen referred to as like bubblegum punk, or some of the oi bands, have discovered Johnny Rotten's house and discovered where he lives and camp out in front of his house. It's kind of like Dylan back in the Village in 1970. And Lydon notes in particular that Victor Vomit from Hull is a particularly persistent person who's really been causing him a lot of problems. So, banging the door. Foreshadowing for the next video. Banging the door. Could Victor Vomit from Hull be, in fact, the subject of Banging the Door? On November the 29th, Lydon and Levine do an interview with Radio 1 to promote Paris au Printemps, and they debut a rough mix of the Flowers of Romance. So that's pretty cool. Lydon's appeal against his 3-month sentence for common assault in Dublin is heard. He is acquitted in a 10-minute hearing when the judge states that he is, quote, satisfied of the petty nature of the incident. And that is that. Lydon talks about this in No Irish, No Blacks, No Dogs, that he wasn't comfortable, he did not feel safe until he was back on the plane. So that is it. A hell of a year for Public Image Ltd. And, you know, from the heights to it ends with while they are making this album. I mean, it is quite a state of uncertainty, and it is something of a state of undoing. Or is it a state of evolution and progression? Or is it both at once? So that is where we leave off. I will be back, you know, with the next video, probably in a couple weeks, and we will be going very in depth into The Flowers of Romance, what could be Public Image Ltd's greatest album. It may very well be my personal favorite. I don't know, but it is a masterpiece. It is their third masterpiece at this point. So you know, spoiler on that one. I think it's a masterpiece. So. And then, you know, and we'll be talking about the Ritz riot and everything. 1981 is another action-packed year, just as 1980 was. So I think that wraps things up here. I hope that you've enjoyed this yet another epic look at the Great Public Image Ltd. Please like and comment and subscribe. Oh, and one other thing. If you've made it this far, my wife and I were watching a video about cooking in England, or this guy who goes to different takeaway spots in England and different restaurants and rates them. It's not Rate My Takeaway. It's a different guy, if for any of you who watch Rate My Takeaway, which is also great. But this guy was eating something called a spice bag. And we were like, what the fuck is a spice bag? So is it always chips, as you would say, as we say French fries? Is it always chips? Are there different things in there? What are the spices? Is that subject to whoever's making it? We were quite perplexed by the phenomenon of a spice bag. Do you always pour some sort of gravy or sauce over it? If you can answer me, if you live in England and can answer, and you've watched all this and you can answer me, leave an answer in the comments, and I will give you a shout out in the 1981 video. How about that? For trying to figure out what the hell is a spice bag. We were very confounded by this. So anyway, that wraps things up here. Like I said, please like and comment and subscribe. Thank you all for watching. I greatly appreciate it, and I will see you soon enough with Public Image Ltd in 1981. And until the next video, bye!